It was a Saturday afternoon, and May Musk had just finished a photo shoot in New York. She was exhausted, but she knew a little shopping spree would lift her spirits. As a woman who defied the odds in the fashion world, being one of the oldest models still working in high demand, she had developed a unique sense of confidence. With her platinum blonde hair and tall, striking frame, she wasn't one to shy away from the spotlight. She entered a luxury boutique, one of the most prestigious stores in Manhattan. The elegant glass doors parted as she walked in, and the air inside was filled with the faint scent of high-end perfumes and freshly polished marble. The store was quiet, almost too quiet, and it made her feel strangely out of place. A salesperson, a young woman in her 20s with sharp eyes and a perfectly tailored suit, was the first to spot her. May smiled politely, expecting to be greeted as any other customer in a high-end store would be. But the young woman's gaze flickered over her and quickly returned to the group of well-dressed, younger shoppers further down the aisle. "Excuse me," May said, her voice calm but firm. "Could you help me with something?" The salesperson didn't answer immediately, her attention still glued to the other customers. May repeated her request, a little louder this time, but it was as if the woman hadn't heard her. May stood still for a moment, feeling the sting of being ignored. She had seen this before, in smaller ways, but never so openly. Finally, the woman turned, her smile so polite it almost felt rehearsed. "I'll be with you in just a moment," she said quickly before turning away again. May's heart sank. It wasn't that she was used to getting special treatment, but this felt different. It felt deliberate. The woman was dismissing her, without reason, without courtesy. She had been a model, a businesswoman, a mother to a son who had become one of the most successful people in the world. And yet, here she was, treated as though she didn't belong. "Excuse me, I'll just go find someone else," May said, attempting to mask her disappointment. She turned around to leave, but her mind was racing. The way she'd been treated wasn't just about being ignored in a store, it was a reflection of something deeper. Age? Her appearance? She couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in her stomach. What had she done to deserve such indifference? The door chimed softly as she walked out. She hadn't even picked up anything to buy. But that wasn't the point. The real sting wasn't the rejection, it was the realization that society still had these unspoken rules about who deserved respect and who didn't. As she stepped onto the busy streets of New York, the bustling city around her seemed almost jarring after the silence of the boutique. She pulled out her phone and dialed her son's number. Elon Musk was always there when she needed him, even if they didn't speak every day. "Hey, Mom. How's it going?" Elon's voice came through the speaker, warm and friendly as ever. "Elon, I need to tell you something," May said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just had an experience at one of those fancy boutiques in the city. You wouldn't believe how I was treated." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and May could almost hear Elon's mind working. She could picture him, sitting in one of his many offices or maybe walking around one of his space stations, always thinking about the next big thing. But right now, he was focused on her. "What happened, Mom?" Elon asked, his tone sharp now, the concern evident in his voice. "I walked into a luxury store, just hoping to look around. But when I asked for help, they barely acknowledged me. I tried again, and they just brushed me off," she explained, her voice thickening with frustration. "I've been ignored like this before, but not in a place like that. I thought I could still get respect, no matter my age or appearance. I guess I was wrong." Elon's response was immediate. "That's unbelievable. You've worked harder than most people I know. You've earned your place, Mom. I'm going to do something about this. I won't stand by and let anyone treat you like that." May smiled, feeling a wave of warmth spread through her. She had always known her son was a man of action, someone who wouldn't sit idly by when something was wrong. But still, this wasn't just about her. It was about the principle of the whole thing, the way people were judged by superficial standards. The way society often wrote off the older generation, the women, the ones who didn't fit into a certain mold. "Thank you, Elon," May said softly. "But it's not just about me. It's about how this happens to so many people, people who deserve better." "Don't worry, Mom. I've got this," Elon said, his voice filled with a mix of determination and anger. As they said their goodbyes, May couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. She knew her son could move mountains when he set his mind to something. And if he was going to take action, there was no telling what kind of ripple effect it might have. Back at his office in Silicon Valley, Elon was already formulating a plan. He couldn't believe the injustice his mother had faced. He had built his empire by challenging norms, by defying expectations. And now, here was a situation where he could use his influence to make a real difference. He grabbed his phone and started drafting an email. It wasn't just to the boutique. It wasn't just to the luxury store. This was about something bigger. This was about challenging the very idea of who gets to be treated with respect and who doesn't. And Elon wasn't about to let this injustice slide. Before he could even finish the email, he leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. He was a visionary, a disruptor. And this would be no different. This wasn't just about a boutique. It was about sending a message to the world. What would you do if your loved one was treated like this? Elon asked aloud to no one in particular, the weight of the question settling in his chest. "I'm going to make sure it never happens again." And just like that, the wheels were set in motion. The world would soon find out how far Elon Musk was willing to go for his family. But for now, the question remained, what exactly was he going to do? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? May Musk's life had never been conventional. Born in 1948 in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, she moved to South Africa with her family at the age of 2. As a child, she quickly learned to navigate the challenges of a new country. Her father, a mechanical engineer, moved the family around a lot, and young May was constantly adapting to new schools, new friends, and new environments. But through it all, she developed a quiet strength. She learned that if you wanted something in life, you had to go after it yourself. Growing up in South Africa during the 1950s and 1960s wasn't easy for anyone, especially for women. The societal expectations of the time were strict and limiting. For women like May, the paths seemed narrow: marry young, have children, and perhaps become a teacher or a nurse. But May had bigger dreams. She wanted to carve her own path, and she wasn't about to let anyone dictate her future. At the age of 15, May began modeling, and her striking looks quickly caught the attention of local agencies. She was tall, with long legs and a striking presence that made her stand out from the crowd. But it wasn't just her beauty that made her special, it was her tenacity. She wasn't just another pretty face, she was determined to succeed in a world that often tried to push women into narrow roles. Despite the challenges of living in apartheid-era South Africa, May's career blossomed. By the time she was in her early 20s, she was a sought-after model, appearing in local magazines and on runways. But her career wasn't the only thing that kept her busy. She married, and at the age of 23, she had her first child, Elon Musk. Having a child so early on in her career wasn't easy, but May was determined to prove that she could balance her ambitions with motherhood. Elon's birth marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She was no longer just a model, she was a mother. The responsibility of raising a child was a heavy one, but May took it on with grace, never once allowing her work to overshadow her role as a parent. But it wasn't long before May's marriage ended. Her husband, Elon Musk, was a successful electromechanical engineer, but their relationship became strained. Despite their differences, May remained focused on providing the best for her children. She wasn't going to let a failed marriage define her or her children's future. As a single mother, May worked tirelessly to support herself and her 2 children, Elon and his younger brother, Kimball. Her modeling career continued to thrive, and she even took on extra jobs as a dietitian to make ends meet. She instilled in her children the importance of hard work, discipline, and self-belief. But what truly set May apart was her unwavering determination. She didn't let the societal pressures or her own personal struggles hold her back. She had big dreams for her children, and she believed that nothing would stop them from achieving them. She encouraged Elon to pursue his passions, no matter how unconventional they might seem, and she gave him the space to dream without limitations. In fact, May's own career began to gain international recognition in her 40s, a time when most models would be transitioning out of the industry. But May was no ordinary model. She refused to let age define her, and her confidence only grew as she got older. She became one of the oldest models to work with major brands, proving that beauty and talent don't expire with age. Her own resilience, combined with her strong family values, shaped Elon Musk's character. Elon would often speak about how his mother's strength and determination influenced his own entrepreneurial spirit. He admired her for never letting anything hold her back and for always staying true to herself. May's ability to thrive in an industry that prized youth and beauty, and her capacity to juggle a successful career while raising 2 children, was no small feat. Her story was one of persistence, perseverance, and, most of all, self-reliance. She was a pioneer in her own right, breaking down barriers for older models and proving that success isn't defined by age. But her story was far from over. The years passed, and May's children grew up to become successful in their own rights. Elon, with his innovative ideas and relentless drive, had transformed the world of technology, while Kimball followed his passion for food and became a successful entrepreneur in the restaurant industry. But even with all their success, May never lost sight of what truly mattered to her: family, love, and respect. Elon's rise to fame came with its own set of challenges. The media scrutinized every aspect of his life, from his business ventures to his personal relationships. And although he had his fair share of triumphs and controversies, May remained a pillar of strength for him. She never asked for the spotlight, but her influence in his life was undeniable. Elon credited his ability to take risks and innovate to the values his mother instilled in him. As May entered her 70s, she continued to model, but on her terms. She didn't need the fame or fortune, she did it because she loved it. It kept her sharp and confident, reminding her that age was just a number. She also became an advocate for older women in the workforce, showing that there was no expiration date on ambition. Despite all her accomplishments, May never allowed herself to be defined by her career or her children's success. She had always been her own person, and she remained that way. Her life wasn't about seeking approval or recognition, it was about living authentically, with courage and conviction. And yet, even with all her strength, May wasn't immune to the kind of disrespect that many women her age faced. As she walked into the luxury boutique that afternoon, she had no idea that this would be the moment that would force her son to act. A simple rejection, a moment of cruelty and indifference, would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. As May reflected on her life, she knew that she had always fought for what she believed in, even when it wasn't easy. But this time, it wasn't just about fighting for herself. It was about fighting for the dignity of all those who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or ignored simply because of their age, appearance, or status. This wasn't just about her. This was bigger. And with Elon on her side, she knew that whatever happened next would be nothing short of extraordinary. The sun was setting over Silicon Valley, casting a golden glow over the sprawling landscape that Elon Musk had come to call home. Despite the beauty of the view, his mind was far from at ease. The more he thought about what his mother had experienced at that luxury boutique, the angrier he became. In a world that seemed to value status over substance, May's rejection was a glaring reminder of the biases that still existed, biases that were too deeply ingrained in society to be ignored. Elon's reputation as a disruptor wasn't just about technology. It was about changing the world's perception of what was possible. He had already revolutionized space travel, electric vehicles, and the way people thought about energy. But this was personal. His mother, a woman who had spent her life breaking barriers, had been humiliated in a place where people were supposed to be treated with respect, regardless of their age or appearance. The more he thought about it, the clearer his mission became. Elon didn't just want to get back at the boutique or its employees. No, this was about something bigger. It was about dismantling the ingrained societal norms that led to people like his mother being ignored. The issue wasn't just about the treatment of one person in one store. It was a reflection of a much larger problem: how society often overlooked those who didn't fit a narrow mold of success and beauty. He wasn't going to let this pass quietly. That evening, as Elon sat in his sleek office surrounded by high-tech gadgets and digital screens, he pulled out his phone and began composing a message. It wasn't just an email to the boutique, it was a call to action. He wanted to do more than address the incident with his mother. He wanted to use this moment as a catalyst to inspire a broader conversation about respect and inclusion. "Dear Boutique Management," Elon typed, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I am writing to express my profound disappointment with how my mother, May Musk, was treated in your store today. My mother is a renowned model, dietitian, and businesswoman who has spent her life breaking barriers in industries where age and gender often result in unfair judgment. The fact that she was ignored and dismissed in your establishment is unacceptable and a reflection of the outdated societal attitudes that we should be challenging, not perpetuating." He paused, reading the words back. He could feel the fire rising in his chest again, but this time, it was more than just anger. It was a sense of purpose. This isn't just about her. It's about anyone who has ever been dismissed or belittled because of their age, appearance, or status. People deserve respect. Full stop. I am asking for an apology for the way my mother was treated and for a re-evaluation of your policies, so that no one else has to go through what she experienced today. Elon finished the email and hit send. But that was only the beginning. He wasn't just going to sit back and wait for a response. He was going to make sure that this incident didn't just fade away into the background. He picked up his phone again, dialing his trusted assistant, Sarah. "Sarah, I need you to get me in touch with a few people. We're going to make some noise about this." Back at the boutique, the young salesperson who had initially brushed off May was still oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. She had no idea that the woman she had dismissed was the mother of one of the most influential entrepreneurs in the world. As the night wore on, the store manager began to receive a flurry of emails and calls, all mentioning the same thing: Elon Musk. Within hours, the boutique's management team was in damage control mode, trying to figure out how to address the growing backlash. But it was too late. Elon wasn't interested in the typical corporate apology. He wanted change, real change. He wanted the world to understand that there was no place for dismissive behavior in today's world, especially when it came to those who had paved the way for others. The next day, Elon was on a video call with his senior leadership team at Tesla. He could see the concern on their faces as they discussed the latest developments. News of the incident at the boutique had already begun to spread across social media, and the public was starting to pick up on the story. Elon was famous for his controversial tweets, and this situation was no exception. He had already posted a message to his millions of followers, voicing his disappointment and calling for change. "All right, team," Elon said, his tone resolute. "This isn't just a PR move. We're going to do more than just criticize the boutique. We're going to turn this moment into something that challenges the very system that allowed this kind of behavior in the first place. We're going to create a movement." The team looked at each other, unsure of what Elon was envisioning. "What do you have in mind?" one of them asked. "We're going to launch a campaign that highlights the importance of respect, inclusion, and breaking down societal barriers. We'll work with organizations that fight ageism and sexism. We'll use the story of my mom and others like her who have been overlooked and mistreated simply because they didn't conform to narrow beauty standards. And we'll make sure people understand that no one, not celebrities, not executives, not everyday people, should ever be dismissed because of their age, appearance, or status." The room went silent as everyone processed Elon's words. The idea of launching a campaign that would challenge the very fabric of social norms was a bold one. But this was Elon Musk, bold was his specialty. We can use our platforms to create a ripple effect. We can shine a spotlight on this issue and make sure it's addressed head-on, Elon continued. Let's take this beyond the boutique. Let's make sure the world knows that respect for people, no matter who they are or how they look, is non-negotiable. His words resonated with the team. The wheels were in motion. Meanwhile, May was still grappling with the emotions that had come flooding back after the incident. She had raised her children to be strong, independent thinkers, and yet, even she couldn't escape the hurt of being dismissed so casually by someone who didn't know her worth. The anger had subsided, but in its place was a quiet resolve. She had always been a woman who believed in fighting for what was right. Now, with Elon by her side, she felt more empowered than ever. As she sat in her living room, reflecting on the events of the past few days, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from Elon. "Mom, I've got your back. We're going to make sure this doesn't just fade away. I'm launching a campaign to take on ageism and sexism. This isn't just about you. It's about making sure everyone, no matter their age or gender, gets the respect they deserve. You're a part of something bigger now." May smiled. She knew that this wasn't just her fight anymore. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that could change the way people saw each other, and the way they treated each other, forever. The rising conflict had begun, and May and Elon were ready to face it head-on. The day after Elon's bold announcement, things began to snowball. What initially seemed like a small incident, the rejection of May Musk at a high-end boutique, was now taking on a life of its own. The power of social media was undeniable. As Elon's tweet spread like wildfire, people from all corners of the world began to share their own stories of feeling overlooked or dismissed based on their age, gender, or appearance. It wasn't just an isolated issue, it was a global problem. Elon knew that this wasn't just about making noise, it was about creating real, lasting change. And that meant action. It meant mobilizing resources, building alliances, and, most importantly, shifting the conversation from one of outrage to one of empowerment. He called an emergency meeting with his closest advisors and campaign team. They gathered in the conference room at Tesla's headquarters, a room that was typically reserved for discussions about electric cars and space exploration. But today, the mission was different. Today, they were going to tackle something far more personal: societal injustice. "All right, team," Elon began, his eyes intense and focused. "We've got one shot at this. This is about more than just raising awareness. We have to change the way people think and act. If we're going to make an impact, we need to build a campaign that goes beyond the usual buzzwords. We need something that resonates with people on a personal level." One of his senior advisors, Maya, leaned forward, a notebook in front of her. "We need to make this personal. People will rally around stories. We can't just talk about issues in the abstract. We need to show how this affects real people. Women like your mom, but also men, and people from all walks of life." Elon nodded. "Exactly. We're not just talking about ageism or sexism in the workplace. We're talking about the way society treats people when they don't fit a narrow mold. It's in every industry, from fashion to tech to entertainment. People are dismissed, ignored, undervalued. And it's not just about the individual's worth, it's about how we, as a society, fail to appreciate what everyone can bring to the table." The room hummed with energy as the team brainstormed. They discussed partnering with non-profit organizations that focused on combating ageism and sexism, creating a viral hashtag campaign to amplify the voices of those who have been ignored, and even organizing a public rally to bring attention to the issue. "We could create a digital platform where people can share their own stories," Maya suggested. "A place where people can talk about their experiences, their struggles. This could be the starting point of a much larger conversation." Elon smiled. "I love it. We'll use technology to bring people together. This isn't just about highlighting the problem, it's about giving people a space to connect, share, and support each other. Let's show the world that there's power in unity." The team got to work immediately, pulling together a strategic plan that would launch the campaign within a week. They reached out to media outlets, influencers, and organizations that could help spread the message. But they knew that it wouldn't be easy. Changing societal norms wasn't something that happened overnight, and they would face pushback from those who were invested in maintaining the status quo. Meanwhile, May was reflecting on the whirlwind of events. She had always been an independent woman, but the support from her son and the campaign team had given her a renewed sense of purpose. She hadn't realized just how deep the wounds of discrimination ran, nor how many people felt the same way she did. But now, with Elon's vision and her own voice amplified through this movement, she felt like she had a real chance to make a difference. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee, when her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Elon. "Hey Mom, I want you to be at the press conference. I know you're not one for the spotlight, but this is important. Your story, your voice, it's going to resonate with people in ways that we can't even imagine yet. Are you in?" May hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the screen. She had spent most of her life working behind the scenes, supporting others and fighting her own battles quietly. But this was different. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a cause that was much larger than any one person. She typed back, "I'm in." The press conference was scheduled for the following week, and as the day approached, the buzz surrounding the campaign grew. News outlets, influencers, and activists were all starting to rally behind the cause. The hashtag #RespectOverlooks was trending, and stories from everyday people began flooding social media. Elon and May knew that this was just the beginning. But as the press conference loomed, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They were about to step onto a stage and announce to the world that something needed to change, and they were going to lead the charge. The night before the conference, Elon sat in his office, reviewing his notes. He was nervous, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because this wasn't a business pitch or a product launch. This was personal. It was about his mother, and about millions of people around the world who had felt ignored, sidelined, or undervalued. He looked over at the portrait of his mother hanging on the wall, a picture taken years ago when she was a young model, standing tall and confident. She had always been a symbol of strength and perseverance to him, and now, he was standing by her side, ready to fight for something bigger than just success, something that would change the way society viewed people. Elon sent a quick text to May, "Tomorrow is going to be big. Whatever happens, we've got this." She responded almost immediately, "We've always got this." The next morning, as they arrived at the press conference, the weight of the moment hit them both. Cameras flashed as they walked into the room, but this time, they weren't just Elon and May Musk, they were the faces of a movement. Elon took the podium first, his usual confident demeanor in place. He addressed the room full of journalists, activists, and supporters. "This isn't just about a single incident at a boutique," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's about a world where people are judged not by their abilities, their character, or their contributions, but by their appearance, age, or gender. And I think it's time to change that." May stood beside him, her presence commanding yet graceful. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath, feeling the strength of all the women, and men, who had ever been overlooked. "I am not just the mother of a successful entrepreneur," she began. "I am a woman who has worked hard my entire life, who has faced rejection, and who has fought for my place in the world. And I'm not done yet." The room was silent as she spoke. May's words carried a weight that resonated deeply with everyone present. "We all deserve respect, no matter our age, our gender, or our appearance," she finished. "It's time for us to stand together and demand it." The press conference ended, but the journey was far from over. The real work had just begun. The journey was just beginning. The aftermath of the press conference was nothing short of extraordinary. Within hours, the world had taken notice. Media outlets, social media influencers, and activists rallied behind the Musk family's call to action. Hashtags like hashtag respect overlooks and hashtag age is just a number began trending globally. The story of May's rejection had sparked an emotional firestorm, and what had once been a single incident at a luxury boutique had become a global movement. Elon sat in his office at Tesla, scrolling through the endless stream of messages, comments, and news articles that flooded his feed. He could barely keep up. The response was overwhelming and humbling. Thousands of people were sharing their own personal stories of discrimination, whether it was ageism, sexism, or simply being dismissed because they didn't fit the narrow standards of beauty or success. But with this tidal wave of support came something else, something darker. Critics. There were always critics. Some saw Elon's campaign as nothing more than a publicity stunt, a way for him to garner more attention for his already well-known name. Others mocked the idea of fighting for respect, calling it a first-world problem, and accusing the Musk family of being out of touch with real societal issues. Elon wasn't surprised by the backlash. He'd been through worse, especially with his outspoken nature and his tendency to challenge the status quo. But this felt different. This wasn't just about him or his businesses. This was personal, for May, for the millions of people who had been marginalized, and for the future they all hoped to create. As he read through a particularly scathing article questioning the authenticity of the campaign, he felt the familiar fire of determination burning in his chest. He wouldn't back down. He couldn't. At the same time, May was feeling a mix of emotions. The outpouring of support had been exhilarating, but it also came with its own set of challenges. The world was watching now, and she felt the weight of that. Every interview, every public appearance, came with the expectation that she would continue to fight, continue to speak out. And she was ready, but there was something deeper at play. As she stood in front of a mirror one evening, preparing for yet another public appearance, she caught sight of herself. The woman who had once been a young model, turning heads with her striking beauty, was now older, but no less powerful. Age had given her wisdom, resilience, and a deep understanding of the challenges that women, in particular, faced in a society that valued youth and superficiality above all else. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every woman who had ever felt overlooked or judged. For every person who had ever been dismissed for being too old, too fat, too unattractive, or too anything. May took a deep breath, her reflection staring back at her. She wasn't going to let the critics define this movement. She wasn't going to let them drown out the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. She texted Elon, "We're doing the right thing, aren't we?" Elon responded almost instantly, "We're changing the world, Mom. Together." The next day, Elon and May were scheduled for a live interview with one of the most prominent talk shows in the country. It was their chance to take their message to a broader audience, to amplify the movement even more. But the closer they got to the interview, the more nervous May became. She had always been comfortable in the background, supporting others, but this was different. Now, her voice was at the forefront of a movement that was bigger than anything she could have imagined. As they walked into the studio lights blazed down on them, and the familiar hum of the cameras surrounded them. Elon gave her a reassuring smile. "We've got this," he said quietly. May nodded, though her heart was pounding in her chest. This wasn't about a luxury boutique anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that could change the way society treated people forever. The interview began, and at first, it was the usual softballs. The host asked Elon about his latest business ventures, his vision for the future of technology, and how his mother had played a role in shaping his entrepreneurial spirit. It was the kind of interview Elon was used to, polished, rehearsed, easy. But then, the host turned to May. "May, your story has resonated with so many people. What made you speak out? Why did you decide to share your experience so publicly?" May took a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the question, the eyes of millions of viewers focused on her. She looked over at Elon, who gave her an encouraging nod. This was her moment. "I've spent my life working hard, building a career, and breaking down barriers. But that moment in the boutique, it shook me. It reminded me of how often people are judged by their appearance or their age, as if that determines their worth. But it doesn't. We all deserve respect. No matter how old we are, no matter how we look, we deserve to be seen for who we truly are, for what we've accomplished and what we're capable of. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, but she didn't stop. The emotion poured out of her, raw and unfiltered. I'm not the only one who's been treated this way. There are millions of people out there who have been ignored, overlooked, dismissed. And I'm here to tell them, you are not invisible. Your voice matters. Tears welled up in her eyes as she finished speaking. It wasn't a scripted answer. It was real. It was raw. The host, visibly moved, nodded. That's incredibly powerful, May. And Elon, you've been a champion for so many causes. How do you see this movement evolving? Elon leaned in, his voice steady. This isn't just a campaign. This is a revolution. It's about shifting the narrative, from superficiality to substance, from judgment to respect. It's time to build a world where everyone, no matter their age, gender, or appearance, is treated with dignity and value. As he spoke, May could feel the weight of what they were doing. This wasn't just a fight for respect. It was a fight for equality, for justice, for the recognition of everyone's worth. And it wasn't just about her. It was about the world, about creating a new world where no one would ever have to feel invisible again. The interview ended with applause from the live audience, and as they walked off the stage, May felt a surge of emotion. It wasn't just relief. It was pride. Pride in what they were doing, in what they had started. But they both knew that this was just the beginning. The world had taken notice, but there was still so much work to be done. As the interview aired that evening, the world responded. People flooded social media with their own stories of discrimination, of times they had been overlooked or judged unfairly. The movement was growing, gaining momentum with every passing hour. But it wasn't just the supporters who were speaking out. The critics, too, had their say. Articles questioning the authenticity of the movement, mocking Elon's motivations, and dismissing May's personal experience began circulating. Some claimed that the campaign was nothing more than a publicity stunt for Elon's businesses, while others argued that it was simply a distraction from the real problems facing the world. But none of it mattered. The message had been heard. The movement had already begun. And there was no turning back now. In the days following the talk show appearance, the media buzz around the campaign continued to escalate. The Musk family's movement had quickly evolved from a personal battle into a global rallying cry. The hashtag #RespectOverlooks had grown into a beacon for people around the world to share their stories of being dismissed, overlooked, or marginalized based on superficial factors. Stories poured in from every corner of the globe, of people standing up for themselves, demanding respect in spaces where they had once been ignored. But as expected, the backlash didn't slow down. Critics, including some powerful figures within the fashion industry and other sectors, publicly denounced the campaign. They labeled it as elitist and out of touch, claiming that the real problems in the world were much bigger than the issues Elon and May were raising. Some even accused Elon of using his mother's rejection as a way to generate more media attention for his various ventures. Elon had anticipated this kind of criticism, but it didn't make it any easier to deal with. His phone constantly buzzed with notifications of new articles, some in support of the movement, others filled with harsh, scathing comments. His advisors and PR team scrambled to manage the situation, but no matter how much they worked to clarify their position, it was clear that the critics weren't backing down. Yet, for every article that criticized the campaign, there were thousands more showing support. Influencers and celebrities shared their own stories of being judged for their appearance or age. Women who had long been pushed aside in the workplace found new courage to speak up about their experiences. And all of this support was building into something more powerful than anyone could have anticipated. Elon, ever the forward thinker, knew that this was a crucial moment. It was time to shift gears from simply raising awareness to implementing tangible change. This wasn't just about exposing injustice, it was about changing systems. He called an emergency meeting with his top team to begin strategizing how to take the movement to the next level. Meanwhile, May was sitting in her quiet home, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded since that fateful day at the boutique. She never imagined that her personal experience would spark a global movement. Her life, which had been defined by a quiet resilience and a willingness to support others from behind the scenes, had suddenly become the face of something much bigger. She had been at the heart of this campaign, and now, she was faced with a deeper question: what would her legacy be? She thought about her own experiences, about the times she had been told she was too old, too tired, or not beautiful enough. She thought about how those moments had shaped her, how they had driven her to fight, to prove that she had value, regardless of her age or appearance. But what about the millions of others who didn't have the same platform? What about the people who didn't have a son with the resources to fight for them? May's heart swelled with both pride and empathy. This movement was giving people a voice, but it needed more than just a voice, it needed action, it needed change. As May looked out her window, a wave of realization washed over her. The world was watching them, and they had a chance to change it. To show people that they were worthy of respect, no matter their age, their gender, or their appearance. But they couldn't stop at awareness. They needed to turn this movement into concrete change, something that could truly make a difference. The next day, Elon reached out to May. He had a plan, one that he hoped would give the movement the push it needed to go beyond the digital world and into real, actionable change. He wanted to use his platform to support a series of initiatives aimed at dismantling systemic ageism and sexism in industries around the world. This wasn't just about making people feel seen, it was about creating lasting policies, creating businesses, and forging partnerships that would redefine societal standards of beauty, worth, and respect. He invited May to come to his office to discuss it in person. As she sat down across from him, she could see the excitement in his eyes, but also a sense of urgency. They were at a crossroads, and what they did next could shape the future of their campaign. "I think we've done a good job of raising awareness," Elon said, his voice steady. "But we need to take this further. We need to start changing the very systems that perpetuate these issues. We've already seen how powerful it can be to expose these injustices, but now it's time to do something more. Something real." May nodded. She had been thinking along the same lines. "What are you proposing?" Elon smiled. "I'm thinking about a partnership with companies in industries where ageism and sexism are rampant. We can create programs to support people who are being overlooked because of their appearance or age. But more than that, we need to push for policy changes that make these kinds of discrimination illegal. We need to change the way businesses think about hiring, the way advertising portrays people, and how society defines success." May's heart raced as she processed the enormity of Elon's plan. And how do we get companies on board with something like this? How do we convince them that it's time to change? Elon leaned forward, his hands clasped. "We need to show them that it's not just the right thing to do. It's also good business. The world is changing, and companies that don't adapt are going to be left behind. We can prove that diversity, in age, in gender, in appearance, is not just a moral imperative. It's an economic advantage. The companies that lead in inclusivity will be the ones that win in the long run." The discussion turned into a full-fledged strategy session. They identified key sectors to target first: fashion, entertainment, technology, and healthcare. They crafted proposals for companies to sign on to, outlining the benefits of embracing diversity in hiring practices and marketing strategies. Elon began making calls to his extensive network, using his influence to convince CEOs and leaders in these industries to take action. Within days, major companies started publicly pledging their support. Fashion houses, tech giants, and even major healthcare providers signed on to new diversity initiatives, agreeing to hire based on merit and to stop perpetuating harmful stereotypes in their advertising. The ripple effect was immediate. More companies began to take notice, seeing the success of those who had already signed on to the movement. But the campaign didn't stop with business. Elon and May partnered with lawmakers to push for new legislation aimed at making discrimination based on appearance, age, and gender illegal. They worked with activists and lobbyists to ensure that these new policies would be enforced, and soon, the first drafts of new laws were circulating in Congress. Weeks turned into months, and the world began to change. The #RespectOverlooks campaign wasn't just a trend, it had evolved into a force that was reshaping industries and societal norms. Elon and May were at the forefront of this revolution, but they never lost sight of the bigger picture. Their ultimate goal was to create a world where people were judged not for how they looked or how old they were, but for what they brought to the table, their talent, their intelligence, their character. And as the movement gained momentum, May couldn't help but smile. She had been rejected in a boutique once, but now, her voice, and the voices of millions of others, were being heard across the globe. It was early morning when Elon and May stood side by side at the entrance of the newly launched Respect Overlooks Summit, a conference that had been months in the making. The event was designed not only to bring together leading figures from various industries but also to ensure that the movement they had started would continue to build momentum, pushing for real-world changes in how people were valued. Inside the Grand Conference Hall, large screens showcased the movement's core message: respect overlooks. Age, appearance, and gender should never define your worth. The audience was a blend of business leaders, celebrities, activists, and everyday people who had been affected by the discrimination the Musk family had fought against. For May, this was the moment of truth. The movement had grown beyond anything she could have imagined, and now, the stakes felt higher than ever. She had spent much of her life in the background, using her platform to elevate others. But today, she wasn't just an observer. She was a leader, a trailblazer in a fight that would define the rest of her life. Ready for this? Elon asked, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. May looked out over the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. I'm ready. Let's change the world. The summit kicked off with speeches from influential leaders who had signed on to the movement. Some were CEOs of major companies, others were celebrities who had built their careers on challenging norms. They spoke passionately about how societal standards had been holding people back, about how they had felt the sting of being judged for superficial reasons, and about how they were working to dismantle those systems of bias. As May took the stage to speak, the room fell silent. She had done this countless times before, spoken in front of crowds, led discussions, answered questions. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was a palpable sense of anticipation, as if the world was waiting for her words to change everything. Her voice echoed in the hall as she began. It's an honor to stand here today, not just as a mother, but as someone who spent decades trying to make a difference. The story that sparked this movement, my story, wasn't just about a boutique rejecting me. It was about how many of us, women and men alike, have been sidelined because of things that should never define us, our age, our appearance, and our gender. She paused for a moment, glancing at the sea of faces before her. We've come a long way. But the fight is far from over. We've made noise, we've brought attention to an issue that's been ignored for too long. But now, we need to ensure that we're not just raising awareness, we need to implement real change. Her words resonated with the crowd. She spoke from the heart, reminding them that they were all a part of something much bigger than themselves. May's passion was infectious, and as she spoke, it was clear that the movement wasn't just about her, it was about the collective power of all those who had been marginalized. Today, we take the next step, she continued. We've gotten companies to pledge their support, but that's only the beginning. We need policies. We need legislation that enforces these values. We need a world where no one, no matter their age, gender, or appearance, is judged by superficial standards. A world where we are all seen for who we truly are, and where our worth is not defined by anyone except ourselves. The room erupted in applause. It was a moment of solidarity, of unity, and of unwavering resolve. But just as May stepped off the stage, she was met with a familiar sight: reporters rushing forward, cameras flashing, microphones poised to catch her every word. For a moment, she felt overwhelmed. The eyes of the world were still upon her, and the responsibility of what they were trying to accomplish was more daunting than ever. As she took a deep breath, Elon appeared by her side, offering his signature calm. "This is what we've been working for. The fight won't be easy, but we've got the power to make real change." May smiled, appreciating the reassurance. "I just hope we don't lose sight of the people we're fighting for. They need us to keep pushing." Elon nodded. "And we will. Together." The summit continued with more workshops, panel discussions, and networking sessions designed to tackle the various facets of the movement. From dismantling ageism in Hollywood to ensuring fair hiring practices in tech companies, experts and activists led conversations that outlined actionable steps toward systemic change. However, not everyone was fully on board. As the movement gained traction, a growing resistance began to emerge. Not just from the critics who had derided Elon's initial campaign, but from certain corporate leaders who felt threatened by the idea of overhauling established practices. They argued that diversity in hiring, particularly age diversity, was impractical and that the world needed to focus on merit, not the superficial changes the movement demanded. It wasn't long before headlines once again began to shift, casting doubt on whether the movement would truly bring about lasting change. Some articles claimed that the economic disruption caused by these new policies would hurt companies in the long run, while others said that the campaign was too focused on image, ignoring the real issues facing the world. The resistance grew louder. Elon wasn't surprised by the pushback. He'd dealt with opposition his entire career, whether it was from automakers, space industry rivals, or environmental skeptics. The difference now was that this fight wasn't about technology or business, it was about something far more personal, far more human. But for every critic, there was another story of someone whose life had been changed by the movement. A middle-aged woman who had been passed over for promotions, only to be offered a leadership role in a tech firm. A senior actor who had been told his career was over, but who was now landing major roles because of the pressure from the movement. These success stories kept the movement alive. And for May, they were a constant reminder of why they couldn't give up. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. Late one evening, as May sat in her office going over notes for an upcoming speech, she received an unexpected call. It was from a top executive at one of the largest fashion brands in the world. The company had been one of the first to publicly endorse the movement, but this call was different. "We've been thinking about what you and Elon said," the executive said. "We want to take it further. We're ready to overhaul our entire advertising strategy. We want to create campaigns that represent the true diversity of our customers, not just in age, but in body types, in backgrounds, in everything. We're in for real change." The news was a game changer. This wasn't just about pledges or partnerships anymore. This was a company, an industry leader, committing to real, systemic change in the way they operated. May's heart swelled with pride. This was what they had been working for. Real change, not just in the headlines, but in the boardrooms, in the very foundations of the industries that had perpetuated the status quo for so long. And this was only the beginning. As May hung up the phone, Elon walked in, a grin on his face. "That was a big win," he said. "It's just the start," May replied, looking out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. "We've only just begun. The fight is far from over, but now, more than ever, I believe we can win." Elon nodded, his eyes gleaming with the same fire they'd always had. "Together, we can change the world." The following months were an emotional roller coaster for both Elon and May. While they had successfully garnered attention for the #RespectOverlooks movement, they were also quickly realizing just how much work lay ahead. The global spotlight on them had brought waves of both support and resistance. And it was the resistance that began to challenge their resolve. The campaign had made enormous strides in the fashion and entertainment industries, but the roadblocks they faced in sectors like healthcare, finance, and tech were proving far more complicated. These industries, often dominated by entrenched power structures and decades-old biases, weren't as willing to embrace the changes they were advocating for. Elon and May spent countless hours in strategy meetings with their team. They were more determined than ever to continue their fight, but the magnitude of the task had become overwhelming. They had worked hard to change public opinion, but changing institutional mindsets would take years, maybe even decades. Despite the growing challenges, the movement began to generate tangible results. More companies were committing to fairer hiring practices, new diversity initiatives were being rolled out, and many of the biggest advertising agencies had pledged to incorporate more realistic, inclusive representations of people in their campaigns. The industry leaders who had first supported Elon and May's movement began to see significant changes in their bottom line. As more people saw themselves reflected in advertisements, engagement soared. It was clear that a shift in how society viewed beauty and worth was taking place. However, it wasn't enough. Elon knew that in order for the movement to truly succeed, the next step would require more than just public-facing commitments. They needed systemic changes to be written into law. And that was where the real fight would begin. One chilly evening in mid-November, Elon and May sat in a conference room with a group of lawmakers who had agreed to meet with them to discuss the possibility of passing legislation that would address discrimination based on appearance, age, and gender. It was a rare moment of quiet in the whirlwind of activity, and May took a deep breath, preparing herself for the conversation ahead. The room was filled with some of the most influential figures in government. Senators, congresspeople, and lobbyists who had the power to shape the laws of the land were all in attendance. Elon stood up first, pacing slightly as he prepared to speak. "We've come a long way since my mother was rejected in that store. But we know that this is just the beginning. The support we've received is powerful, but it's not enough to stop the deep-rooted discrimination that exists across multiple industries. We need legislative action." A senator from California, who had already been a vocal supporter of the movement, leaned forward. "We've been watching the progress of your campaign closely. The attention it's gained has been monumental, and the businesses that have joined in, the numbers are impressive. But the reality is that creating laws to protect people based on age and appearance isn't going to be easy. It's a slippery slope. We could face significant pushback from big corporations who rely on idealized representations of youth and beauty." Elon didn't flinch. "We understand that there will be resistance. We've always known that. But change doesn't happen without disruption. We're not asking people to throw away their businesses or reimagine everything. We're asking for fairness, for inclusivity. We're asking for the world to be a place where people of all ages, shapes, and appearances are given the same respect." May spoke up. Her voice was steady but firm. "The fact is, there are millions of people who have been left behind because they didn't fit the narrow mold that society has created. And there are millions more who are living in fear that one day they, too, will be overlooked, rejected, or discarded because of things that have nothing to do with their ability, their worth, or their contribution to the world. These aren't just abstract ideas we're talking about, these are people's lives. People's futures." A moment of silence hung in the air. The lawmakers looked at each other, weighing the gravity of the conversation. Finally, one of the senators spoke. "We're not blind to the challenges. But you're right, this is a conversation we need to have. We need to start drafting legislation that addresses these issues head-on. We'll need public hearings, broad support, and careful consideration of the potential economic impact. But we're willing to work with you to make it happen." Elon's face softened with gratitude. "We're in this for the long haul. We'll do whatever it takes to keep pushing this forward." The meeting that night was a turning point. It marked the beginning of a new chapter for the movement, one that would require the full weight of both grassroots activism and top-level political negotiation. And while Elon and May's resolve had been unwavering up until this point, they now realized that to truly succeed, they would need to bring everyone to the table. As the months passed, the legislative push gained traction. Elon and May made numerous trips to Washington, speaking with lawmakers, meeting with lobbyists, and pushing their agenda at every opportunity. They continued to work with advocacy groups that represented marginalized communities, especially those who had been affected by ageism and sexism in ways that had been ignored for too long. The challenge, however, was more than just political. The corporate world had begun to push back in ways that were more subtle, but just as dangerous. Some companies started offering counter-initiatives, claiming that their products and services already catered to a wide range of people. Others dismissed the movement as a trend, one that would fade in time. But Elon and May's team knew better. They knew the cultural tide was shifting. They knew that this movement wasn't just about them, it was about creating lasting change for everyone who had been overlooked. One night, as Elon and May sat together at dinner, discussing the latest developments, May leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "We've made a lot of progress, but I can't shake the feeling that we've only just scratched the surface." Elon nodded in agreement. "The work we've done so far is important, but I think we're about to enter the hardest phase yet. This is where the real resistance will come, and the stakes are higher than ever." May smiled faintly, her eyes shining with the same unwavering determination that had fueled the campaign from the beginning. "But we can't stop now. Not when we've come this far." As the year drew to a close, the first drafts of the legislation were finally ready. It was clear that the fight wasn't over, but the next steps would be more decisive than ever. And for Elon and May, the journey ahead held both uncertainty and hope. They knew the battle would be tough, but they also knew that they were on the right side of history. The new year brought with it an air of anticipation. The momentum for the #RespectOverlooks movement was palpable. Elon and May had successfully garnered a vast coalition of supporters, activists, lawmakers, and corporations, all united under the banner of respect, equality, and inclusion. But as much progress as they had made, it was becoming clear that the hardest challenges were still ahead. The drafting of the proposed legislation had begun to gain traction in the Senate and Congress, but as the bill neared the point of being presented for a vote, the backlash intensified. Corporate lobbyists had begun to mobilize in opposition to the movement. These were powerful players with deep pockets and influence in Washington, and they weren't going down without a fight. Elon sat in his office at Tesla one late evening, reviewing the latest round of updates. He glanced over at the stack of legal documents, proposals, and press reports that had accumulated over the past week. A growing sense of frustration began to creep in. The corporate world, especially the beauty and fashion industries, was using their might to drown out their message. "They're not playing fair, are they?" May's voice cut through the tension as she entered the room. She had been in meetings all day, pushing for further endorsements of the movement from key players in the healthcare industry. But like Elon, she too was feeling the weight of the fight. "They never do," Elon replied with a sigh, rubbing his temples. "But we can't give up now. We've come too far." May nodded in agreement, but her mind was elsewhere. "The question is, how far are we willing to go to make sure this happens? We're about to face a real test, we can't back down." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and late-night strategy sessions. Elon and May found themselves working around the clock to keep the momentum going. While the opposition continued to rally their forces, the media was beginning to highlight the growing divide. Critics accused the movement of shaming beauty standards, arguing that it was an attack on the traditional ideals of the American dream. They painted the movement as an extremist agenda, suggesting that businesses would suffer if they were forced to embrace such inclusive policies. They even claimed that the movement was overreaching by pushing for legal reforms, accusing Elon and May of using their platform for personal gain. But for every headline that sought to undermine their cause, another piece of good news emerged. A tech giant, one of the largest companies in the world, had announced a new policy that would explicitly forbid discrimination based on age or appearance in its hiring process. Several influential celebrities had made public statements of support, including A-list actors who pledged to work only with brands that upheld the values of the movement. In the face of mounting criticism, May kept her focus on the positive. Look at the people who are joining us, she said to Elon one evening. This isn't just about us anymore. This is a movement that's bigger than both of us. Elon agreed but also understood the stakes had never been higher. The bigger the movement gets, the harder the opposition will fight. They'll use everything they have to stop us. Then, the unthinkable happened. A scandal erupted. One of the key senators who had been supporting the movement, Senator Thomas Grant, was caught in a compromising situation. Investigative journalists had uncovered evidence that he had been working behind closed doors with several major corporations, pushing back against the proposed legislation in exchange for large political donations. The scandal rocked Washington, and the senator's credibility was in question. The timing couldn't have been worse. As Elon and May watched the news unfold, they knew the implications. The backlash from the media was swift and unforgiving. Some in the Senate who had been on their side now began to waver. Would they stand behind the bill, or would they distance themselves from the scandal to protect their own political futures? Just when we thought things couldn't get worse, Elon muttered, his tone bitter. Now they've got ammunition to discredit everything we've worked for. May, however, refused to give in. This is just another obstacle. We've faced worse. If we let them use this against us, we'll be handing them the victory. We can't let that happen. She turned to Elon, determination flashing in her eyes. We need to take this head on. We need to make sure the public knows what's really at stake here, not the politics, not the scandals, but the people we're fighting for. The next few days were a blur of public appearances, impromptu speeches, and media blitzes. Elon and May made it their mission to not only defend the integrity of the movement but also to ensure that the focus stayed on the issues that mattered most: equality, respect, and inclusion. They began a targeted campaign aimed at putting the issue of systemic discrimination back at the forefront. May went on national television, her voice steady as she confronted the media's focus on the scandal. The real question here is not about politics, it's about people, she said in a televised interview. We've been fighting for years to be heard, to be seen as more than just our appearance, our gender, or our age. This isn't about one senator or one scandal, it's about the millions of individuals who have faced rejection, who have been told they're not enough, simply because they don't conform to outdated ideals. It's time to make real change. And we won't stop until we do. Her words struck a chord. The response was overwhelming, with social media buzzing with support. It was a turning point for the movement, as the tide began to shift in their favor once again. It became clear that the public was more interested in the message than the scandal surrounding a single politician. The movement's momentum grew once more. More companies, particularly in the tech and healthcare industries, rallied behind the cause, announcing new policies that protected their employees from discrimination. The bill in Congress was once again gaining support, and while there were still hurdles to overcome, it was becoming increasingly clear that the #RespectOverlooks movement wasn't going anywhere. But as they celebrated their victories, Elon and May knew that the hardest part was still to come. Passing the legislation would be only the beginning. The real test would come in the years ahead, when the true impact of the movement would start to take shape. Elon and May stood together on the balcony of their office, overlooking the bustling city below. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden glow over the skyline. It was a peaceful moment, a brief pause in the storm that had defined their lives for the past year. Elon turned to May. We've come so far, but this is just the beginning. May smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I know. But now, more than ever, I believe we can win this. We have the world's attention. And we won't stop until respect is the standard, not the exception. The political climate was heating up as the legislation aimed at fighting discrimination based on appearance, age, and gender neared its final stages. Elon and May were working tirelessly, day and night, alongside their team of advocates, lawmakers, and allies. They knew this was the moment they had all been waiting for, the culmination of months of hard work, setbacks, and small victories. It was now or never. But the opposition was just as relentless. Big corporations, especially those in the fashion, beauty, and advertising industries, were pulling out all the stops to stop the bill from passing. Massive lobbying efforts flooded Washington. Public campaigns against the bill began to appear on television, online, and in print, all attempting to discredit the movement by painting it as a threat to the American dream, to free enterprise, and to creativity. The media was buzzing, and the fight was becoming a media war. The arguments were growing more heated, with the public divided. Supporters of the bill, including Elon and May, were accused of trying to destroy what made America great: individualism, meritocracy, and the freedom to strive for perfection. On the other side, critics of the opposition were gaining traction by showing the real consequences of discrimination, how it had affected real lives, how it had perpetuated inequality, and how it had limited potential for millions of people. Elon sat in his office, the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. The pressure of knowing that the movement's success or failure rested on the passing of this legislation was almost unbearable. "We need to win this," Elon said, staring at the documents in front of him. "If we fail here, we lose everything we've worked for." May, who had been tirelessly campaigning in the field, entered the room. Her face was tired, but there was a fire in her eyes. "We're not going to fail," she said with conviction. "I know it feels like we're up against the odds, but the support is growing. People are starting to see what's at stake." Elon looked at her, grateful for her unwavering optimism. "I just don't want to let anyone down." "You won't," May assured him. "We've come this far. We're doing this for the future. For the people who have been ignored for too long. For every person who has ever felt like they weren't enough because they didn't fit a narrow definition of beauty or success. We're doing it for them." As the final vote drew closer, Elon and May began to ramp up their efforts. They held rallies across the country, speaking directly to the people, reminding them that this fight was about more than just changing a law, it was about changing the way society viewed people. At a rally in Los Angeles, the energy was electric. Thousands of people, young and old, from all walks of life, gathered to hear Elon and May speak. Cameras flashed, and the air buzzed with anticipation. When Elon took the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. He raised his hand, silencing them. "Thank you, everyone," Elon said, his voice carrying over the microphone. "This movement has never been just about me or my mother. It's about all of us. It's about each person in this crowd who has ever felt like they didn't belong. It's about the people who have been told they're not good enough, not young enough, not beautiful enough. Well, we're here to tell you that you are enough. You are worth it. And this bill? This is our promise to you that we won't stop fighting for your right to be treated with dignity, no matter your age, your appearance, or your gender." The crowd erupted into applause, chanting, "Respect over looks. Respect over looks." May took the stage next, her voice strong and clear. "It's easy to say that we don't need a law to make the world a better place. But the reality is, when people are discriminated against because of something as arbitrary as the way they look or their age, it's not enough to simply talk about change. We need to make it happen. We need laws that protect us. We need to create a society where respect is given freely, not earned based on appearances." The crowd roared in agreement. This wasn't just about a bill. It was about changing the world. Back in Washington, the final votes were set to take place in the coming days. Elon and May had made countless trips to the Capitol, meeting with lawmakers, presenting new data, and making their case. The pressure was mounting, and the final push was going to be crucial. As they sat in the Senate hearing room, awaiting the vote, May turned to Elon. "I never imagined it would come down to this. I never imagined the fight would be this long. But look how far we've come." Elon smiled softly, his hand resting on hers. "We've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go. But this moment, this vote, could change everything. It's the turning point." The room grew quiet as the senators took their seats, and the vote began. Each senator was called to the floor, and one by one, they cast their votes on the bill. The tension in the room was palpable. The world was watching. Senator Thomas Grant, who had once been a vocal supporter but had faltered after the scandal, stood up. There was a hushed silence as he took a deep breath. "I vote yes," he said, his voice firm. One by one, other senators followed suit. The final votes came in, and after what felt like an eternity, the results were read aloud. The bill had passed. The #RespectOverlooks bill was officially law. The celebration was a whirlwind. Elon and May were surrounded by their team, friends, and supporters, all celebrating their hard-won victory. The applause was deafening as they stood together on the steps of the Capitol. For the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to feel the weight of their achievement. "This is it," Elon said, grinning. "We did it." May nodded, her eyes shining. "It's just the beginning, Elon. The real work starts now." In the months that followed, the passage of the bill marked the beginning of a new era. The #RespectOverlooks movement had sparked a global conversation about beauty, age, and gender, and the legal landscape began to shift. Corporations, small businesses, and organizations were forced to reevaluate their policies and practices, creating more inclusive environments for people of all ages and appearances. Elon and May's journey wasn't over, but they had achieved the impossible. They had changed the world. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The passing of the #RespectOverlooks bill was a historic moment, but as Elon and May quickly learned, the hard work was far from over. The excitement of victory was quickly tempered by the realization that the true battle lay not in the drafting of legislation, but in its implementation and the cultural shift it would require. In the weeks following the bill's passage, the media buzzed with mixed reactions. Some hailed it as a revolutionary step forward, a victory for the people. Others, particularly critics from the beauty, fashion, and entertainment industries, saw it as an existential threat to their businesses. They argued that the law would limit creative expression and stifle innovation. Still, there was another group, those who had long been excluded from the mainstream conversation, who saw the bill as the first step toward dismantling the toxic standards that had dominated society for generations. May, now more than ever, felt the weight of the responsibility she and Elon had taken on. As the face of the movement, she was constantly in the spotlight. Every interview, every speech, and every public appearance came with scrutiny, some supportive, some critical. But she wasn't backing down. Elon, too, was busy. Tesla and SpaceX had their own set of challenges, and while he was passionate about the bill, he knew that the road ahead was still long. He had to balance his commitments to these companies while also being the voice for the #RespectOverlooks movement. The next step was ensuring that the bill was enforced, that businesses followed the new regulations, and that people who had been marginalized would actually feel the effects of the law in their daily lives. One afternoon, as Elon was heading out of a meeting at SpaceX, he received a call from May. She sounded shaken. "Elon, you need to see this," she said. "There's a new campaign going around, and it's ugly." Elon's heart sank. "What kind of campaign?" "It's a backlash," May replied, her voice tight with frustration. "A lot of these big beauty brands are coming together. They've launched a campaign about real beauty and freedom of expression. It's all over social media. And they're painting us as anti-creativity, anti-freedom. They're saying that we're trying to enforce one standard of beauty. They've twisted everything." Elon stared at the phone for a long moment, processing what May had said. He knew this was coming. The people who had the most to lose would fight tooth and nail to preserve the status quo. But this was different. This was personal. It wasn't just about laws anymore, it was about people's hearts and minds. And that's where the real battle would take place. "I'll be home soon," he said, finally. "Let's talk about this in person." Back at their home, May had the TV turned on, the sound muted, and a live feed of the new campaign playing. It was a slickly produced video, featuring young, beautiful models, all smiling with perfect teeth and flawless skin. The slogan flashed across the screen, "Real beauty is freedom." It wasn't subtle. It was a direct challenge to everything they had worked for. The message was clear: they were trying to turn back the clock, to reassert an image of beauty that had caused so much harm in the first place. "I don't know how we fight this," May said quietly, staring at the screen. "They've managed to turn our own message against us. They've made it about individuality, about self-expression. How do you argue with that?" Elon walked over and sat down beside her. He watched the campaign for a moment before replying, his voice steady. "We don't fight it. We push forward. What they're selling is a lie, and it's a lie that's been hurting people for decades. We can't back down now." May turned to him, eyes searching. "But how do we make them understand? How do we show them that true freedom comes from lifting people up, not from tearing them down?" Elon's gaze softened. "We show them by leading with our example. The only way to counter this kind of propaganda is with the truth. We need to keep pushing the message. We need to show people how much stronger we are when we celebrate everyone, not just the ones who fit a narrow idea of beauty." The following weeks saw the backlash intensify. The campaign against the bill, although not as large as it seemed at first, grew in influence through targeted ads and media campaigns. Some corporations began to question their involvement with the movement, worried about alienating their core customers. There were whispers in the boardrooms of large companies, and some major influencers and celebrities began to distance themselves from the #RespectOverlooks movement, unwilling to alienate their base. But Elon and May weren't discouraged. Instead, they doubled down on their message. They went on national television, held public forums, and continued to emphasize that this was not about stifling creativity, it was about giving people the space to be their true selves, free from the pressure of conforming to toxic beauty standards. One afternoon, May received an unexpected visitor at her office. It was Sarah, a former model who had been one of the first to join the #RespectOverlooks movement. Sarah had once been a household name, the face of several major beauty campaigns. But after years of struggling with eating disorders, body image issues, and the toll the industry took on her mental health, Sarah had walked away from modeling. She had become one of the most outspoken advocates for the movement. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, taking a seat across from May, her eyes focused. "We need to do something bold. Something that people can't ignore." May leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "We need to create our own campaign. Show people what real freedom looks like. Real beauty. We need to make it personal. Show the stories of the people who have been affected by these standards. The ones who've been ignored, rejected, and pushed to the edge." May's face lit up. "That's exactly it. We need to make this about the people, not the corporations. It's time we put real faces to the movement. We need to show the world what happens when people are allowed to just be themselves." Over the next few weeks, May and Sarah put together a grassroots campaign. They reached out to people from all walks of life, people who had suffered from discrimination because of their appearance, their age, or their gender. They gathered stories, raw and powerful, from individuals who had been told they weren't good enough, who had faced rejection, ridicule, and isolation. They compiled these stories into a short documentary, featuring people who had chosen to live authentically, despite the odds. When the campaign was ready to launch, Elon and May stood together at the premiere. The room was filled with activists, lawmakers, and members of the press. As the lights dimmed and the screen flickered to life, May's heart pounded in her chest. This was their answer to the backlash. This was the truth, the real stories that had never been told. The documentary began, showing real people telling their stories: an older woman who had been told she was too old for a job, a young man who had been rejected by the modeling industry for not fitting the traditional mold, a mother who had struggled with body image issues her entire life. Each story was gut-wrenching, but also inspiring, as these individuals shared how they had fought for their right to exist as they were, without shame. As the film ended, the room was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the audience stood, clapping, moved by the raw emotion and truth of what they had just witnessed. Elon stood up, his voice firm. "This is what it's about. This is what we've been fighting for. True freedom is about letting people be themselves, without fear of rejection or judgment. We won't stop until everyone can live that truth." The documentary went viral, spreading across social media and news outlets. People everywhere began sharing their own stories, joining the movement with a renewed sense of purpose. The backlash began to fade as the power of real stories drowned out the manufactured campaigns of the beauty industry. Elon and May's fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, they could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The hashtag Respect Overlooks movement had gained unstoppable momentum, and change was on the horizon. The viral success of the hashtag Respect Overlooks documentary had far-reaching effects, not just within the United States, but across the globe. People everywhere had been touched by the stories of discrimination, rejection, and the power of resilience. It wasn't just a campaign anymore, it was a movement that transcended borders, cultures, and industries. Elon and May watched as the world began to shift. From Europe to Asia, from South America to Africa, the conversation about beauty standards and discrimination based on appearance and age was sparking new debates. The media was abuzz with headlines like, "Global Shift, How Hashtag Respect Overlooks is Changing Beauty Norms," and "Redefining Beauty, a Movement Spreads Beyond Borders." As Elon and May worked tirelessly to spread their message, the weight of global change began to feel both exhilarating and daunting. In Paris, a major fashion brand announced it would no longer hire models based solely on their age or appearance. Instead, they would embrace diversity, showcasing talent and personality as key factors in their campaigns. The fashion world, traditionally one of the most conservative and resistant to change, had felt the winds of transformation. A giant had started to move. In Tokyo, an influential beauty brand launched an ad campaign featuring people of all shapes, sizes, and ages. The brand's CEO released a statement, saying, "True beauty isn't about conforming to an ideal. It's about celebrating who we are, inside and out." Elon and May were invited to a UN summit in Geneva to speak about their journey and the global implications of the movement. There, world leaders and policymakers discussed how societal norms around beauty had led to systemic inequality. More importantly, they started considering laws that could bring about significant change worldwide. But while the success stories were inspiring, the movement also faced fierce opposition, both domestically and abroad. Some governments were hesitant to pass laws that would regulate industries like fashion and beauty, citing concerns about censorship and the potential economic impacts on their booming fashion sectors. Other critics argued that the global conversation about beauty was moving too fast, that it was undermining individual expression, and that it was creating a new form of political correctness. At home, Elon and May knew that the journey was far from over. They were now fighting to make the hashtag Respect Overlooks bill not only a success but a global blueprint for change. The stakes were high, and the opposition was fierce, but the momentum from the documentary was impossible to ignore. Back in the US, a major development emerged. The Department of Justice had started investigating large corporations that continued to perpetuate discriminatory hiring practices, especially in the entertainment and beauty industries. More businesses were brought to trial for violating the principles of the hashtag Respect Overlooks bill. It was a moment of reckoning for many companies that had once relied on outdated and harmful beauty standards to sell products. One evening, as May sat in her office, reviewing news coverage of the trials, she received a text from Elon, "Got some big news, meeting with the EU tomorrow. They're considering legislation similar to the hashtag Respect Overlooks bill. Let's talk when I get back." Her heart raced as she read the message. Elon's meetings were always intense, but this one felt different. If the European Union passed similar laws, it would be an unprecedented global domino effect, putting pressure on other regions to follow suit. Elon arrived back late that night. May was waiting for him, her eyes filled with anticipation. "They're in," Elon said, dropping his bag by the door. "The EU is ready to move forward with a version of the bill. They want to model it after what we did. They've been listening to activists, policymakers, and businesses who support the change. They're even talking about global initiatives. There's serious talk of making anti-discrimination legislation a universal human right." May couldn't help but smile. "That's incredible. But, what does that mean for us, for the movement?" "It means the next chapter. We need to start planning our global strategy," Elon replied, pacing slightly, his mind already working on the details. "We'll need to collaborate with international groups, build alliances with other countries, and start organizing conferences and global campaigns. This could change everything." The couple's international tour began almost immediately after the EU's announcement. They traveled to cities like Berlin, London, and Madrid, meeting with local lawmakers, activists, and citizens who were eager to take part in the movement. In each city, they spoke passionately about the impact of their fight for equality, diversity, and respect. At one event in London, May shared her story with a packed auditorium. Her voice was powerful as she spoke about the struggles she'd faced throughout her life, from being rejected by modeling agencies to fighting for her right to be heard. She talked about the importance of self-love, of not allowing society to dictate how we should feel about ourselves. Afterward, a woman in the crowd came up to May, her eyes red from tears. "Your story gave me hope," she said. "I've been told my whole life I'm not enough because of how I look. I've battled depression because I never felt like I fit in. But hearing you, it makes me believe there's a place for people like me in this world." May hugged her tightly. "There is. There absolutely is." Meanwhile, the #RespectOverlooks movement began to attract support from unexpected places. Major tech companies, including Apple and Google, pledged to incorporate the principles of the bill into their own hiring practices and marketing strategies. Influencers with large followings started speaking out against body shaming and ageism, sharing their own stories of overcoming self-doubt. The entertainment industry, which had long been criticized for perpetuating narrow beauty standards, began to change as well. TV networks and film studios started to cast more diverse characters, people of all shapes, sizes, and ages, changing the landscape of entertainment. For Elon, the push for global change was a complicated balancing act. On one hand, the progress felt monumental. On the other, there were always those who were trying to slow it down. He was constantly bombarded with messages from critics who called him a social justice warrior, or accused him of trying to push a one-size-fits-all narrative. They claimed that the beauty industry should be left to regulate itself and that freedom of expression should not be limited by legislation. But Elon had always been someone who believed in pushing boundaries, whether in space exploration or in changing society. He was undeterred. Back in the US, the latest polling data confirmed what Elon and May had suspected: the majority of Americans were now in favor of the principles laid out by the #RespectOverlooks bill. People had begun to realize that the fight wasn't just about looks, it was about opportunity, about fairness, and about humanity. The ultimate realization was clear. True equality was not just a dream, it was something within reach. And the path forward was clear: continue to fight, continue to push, and continue to inspire. The whirlwind of the past few months had left Elon and May exhausted, but they knew the hardest part of their journey was just beginning. The #RespectOverlooks movement had gained unprecedented traction, but with global influence came even bigger challenges. The opposition was fierce, and the stakes had never been higher. As they prepared for the final push, ensuring the implementation of their vision, they both knew that this would be the most important battle they would face. Elon and May stood on a stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. The world's most powerful political, business, and thought leaders gathered here each year, and this time, it was their turn to address the audience. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Every word they spoke could shape the future of the global economy, culture, and the fight for true equality. The atmosphere in the room was electric. As they walked to the podium, May's heart raced. She had spent most of her life in the public eye, but this was different. The world was watching. Elon stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. "We stand here today, not to ask for acceptance, but to demand it. The world is changing, and the only way forward is by embracing the truth, that beauty is not one size, one shape, or one age. It is in every single one of us, and it is not for anyone to define but ourselves." He paused, letting his words sink in. The hashtag Respect Overlooks movement is not a trend. It is not a fleeting idea. It is a fight for equality. A fight to create a world where everyone, regardless of how they look, is given the same opportunities, the same respect, and the same chance to succeed. This is the future we are building. May joined him at the podium, her voice steady but filled with passion. "I'm here because I've lived the struggle. I've been told I wasn't enough. I've been dismissed because of my age, my body, my appearance. And I know there are millions of people out there who have experienced the same. This isn't just about beauty, it's about human dignity." As they spoke, a silent but powerful revolution was taking place outside the conference. Social media exploded with the hashtag Respect Overlooks trending worldwide. People from every corner of the globe were sharing their stories, reclaiming their identities, and joining the movement. The stories of ordinary people, mothers, fathers, teachers, students, workers, were flooding platforms, bringing the raw power of the movement to the forefront. But not everyone was on board. Powerful interests continued to push back. Major corporations, particularly in the fashion and entertainment industries, had a lot to lose if the movement succeeded. Some took the more subtle approach of providing token support for the cause while continuing to operate under the same harmful standards. Others went on the attack, discrediting the movement, calling it divisive, and warning of economic collapse if their beauty ideals were no longer embraced. One such attack came from a prominent fashion mogul, who took to the media to call the movement a dangerous overreach. His company, which had been known for its exclusive campaigns featuring young, thin models, was a key player in the ongoing war of ideas. His words sent shockwaves through the fashion community. "We cannot allow one group to dictate what we should find beautiful," he declared during a high-profile interview. "Beauty is about aspiration. And if we start accepting mediocrity, where does it end?" May's reaction was swift. She posted a response on her social media, her words cutting through the noise with precision. "Beauty isn't about aspiration. It's about reality. And the reality is, people are tired of being told they're not enough. I'll take reality over illusion any day." The post quickly went viral, and the public responded. Hundreds of thousands of comments poured in, supporting May's message. People weren't buying the narrative of aspiration anymore. They wanted something real, something that reflected who they truly were. The next battle, however, was not going to be fought in the court of public opinion, it was going to happen in the halls of power. Elon and May knew that even with widespread support, passing laws in multiple countries was a long and arduous process. They would need to align with global leaders, businesses, and grassroots activists to push the hashtag Respect Overlooks initiative into tangible change. In Washington, D.C., lawmakers were beginning to introduce bills modeled after the hashtag Respect Overlooks law. It was clear that the momentum was building. But some lawmakers, particularly those with ties to industries that stood to lose from the changes, were working tirelessly to undermine the movement's progress. Elon and May knew the time had come for a decisive moment. They needed to push their agenda beyond simple legislation, they needed to shift the global cultural framework around beauty and discrimination for good. The plan was ambitious. Elon, through his vast network, secured a meeting with key world leaders at the United Nations in New York. The goal was clear: get the UN to pass a global declaration recognizing beauty discrimination as a human rights violation. This declaration would serve as a foundation for countries to build their own laws around, creating an international standard that would challenge harmful beauty ideals worldwide. But securing such a global shift was no small task. Elon and May were aware that they would face stiff resistance from powerful lobbies that had benefited from the status quo. In preparation for the summit, they met with activists from various countries who had already seen the benefits of the #RespectOverlooks bill. Their testimonies, powerful and unflinching, were the heart of the presentation. On the day of the summit, the atmosphere was tense. The room was filled with world leaders, including politicians, diplomats, and activists from countries across the globe. As Elon and May took the stage, they knew this could be the moment that would determine whether the movement would be remembered as a fleeting moment in history, or the catalyst for true global change. Elon spoke first. "We stand before you today not just as activists, but as citizens of the world. The standards of beauty that have been imposed on us, that have shaped our societies and economies, have caused immeasurable harm. But we have the power to change that. Together, we can build a world where no one is judged based on their appearance, where everyone has the opportunity to succeed regardless of how they look. This is about human dignity." May followed with an emotional speech. "This isn't just a movement for me, for Elon, or even for those in this room. This is a movement for all the people who have been silenced by the world's idea of what is acceptable. It's for the mother who was told she was too old for a job. For the person who was bullied for their body type, or their skin color, or their age. This is about justice." The room was silent. And then, one by one, world leaders began to rise. Some spoke of the cultural damage caused by beauty standards, others of the economic inequality it perpetuated. The voices of activists rang out in unison. It was clear, this was no longer just a battle for beauty, it was a battle for human rights. The UN Declaration passed with overwhelming support. It was a monumental achievement, one that would reshape the way beauty and equality were defined across the globe. But Elon and May knew this was just the beginning. The real work was only starting. With new laws to be implemented and cultures to be changed, they were ready for the challenge. They knew that the true battle wasn't about winning a single law, but about changing hearts and minds, one person, one country, and one industry at a time. The announcement of the United Nations Declaration on Beauty Standards had been a victory, but it was also a call to action. Elon and May knew that, while the passage of the declaration was historic, it was merely a stepping stone. The real challenge now was turning the declaration into lasting change, implementing the principles of the #RespectOverlooks movement in every country, industry, and community. In the months that followed, a flurry of activity began. The momentum from the global summit carried them forward, but the fight was far from over. May, though energized, couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much bigger journey, one that would take years, if not decades, to fully realize. The UN Declaration had ignited a ripple effect across the globe. In countries like Canada, Australia, and many parts of Europe, local governments began drafting policies to combat beauty discrimination. Anti-discrimination laws were being updated to include appearance and age as protected categories. Businesses were forced to adapt as well. Companies in fashion, advertising, and entertainment that had previously relied on narrow beauty standards found themselves facing a stark new reality. If they didn't evolve, they risked falling out of touch with the changing cultural landscape. Elon and May were at the center of it all. In between speaking engagements, public appearances, and consulting with lawmakers, they worked relentlessly behind the scenes to help shape these new policies. "There's no turning back now," May often said, her voice filled with both excitement and the weight of responsibility. Elon, with his usual calm determination, nodded. "No, there isn't. But we can't just leave it up to governments and businesses to make the change. This has to be a cultural shift, people need to feel it in their everyday lives." It wasn't just a fight for laws, it was a fight for hearts and minds. And that meant taking the conversation to places where it mattered most, in schools, workplaces, homes, and on social media. To start, May partnered with educational organizations to create a curriculum aimed at teaching children from an early age about the harmful effects of beauty standards. The program focused on self-acceptance, respect, and diversity, encouraging young people to celebrate their differences rather than conform to a single, often unrealistic, ideal. The goal was to make sure that the next generation grew up with a more inclusive view of beauty and identity. Meanwhile, Elon threw his weight behind a new initiative aimed at changing how technology platforms, including social media, approached beauty standards. He had long been vocal about the influence of social media on mental health, and now, more than ever, he saw an opportunity to challenge the algorithms that promoted perfect bodies and faces. Algorithms control what we see, what we think is acceptable, and what we aspire to, Elon said during a meeting with Silicon Valley's top executives. But what if the algorithms started promoting diversity, real bodies, real faces? What if the world could be seen as a mosaic of individual stories rather than a single definition of perfection? The idea was simple but radical: design algorithms that celebrated diversity and encouraged healthy, positive interactions online. The team at Tesla's AI division, which Elon had quietly assembled, began researching how to create systems that would prioritize respect and self-acceptance. They called the project Beauty in Every Frame, and it became a game-changer. As the #RespectOverlooks movement gained traction, a new generation of influencers began to emerge. These were people who didn't fit traditional beauty standards, yet had millions of followers. They were advocates for body positivity, mental health, and authenticity. Social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok, once plagued by perfectionist trends, began to shift. Influencers now posted unfiltered selfies, shared real struggles, and celebrated imperfections. One influencer, Naomi, a woman with visible scars from a childhood accident, became one of the movement's most powerful voices. She used her platform to talk openly about how she had been made to feel ashamed of her appearance and how she had learned to embrace her scars as part of her identity. Naomi's posts resonated with millions of people. Her following grew exponentially, and soon, she was invited to speak at conferences around the world, including a major panel at the next United Nations Human Rights Assembly, which would discuss appearance-based discrimination and its intersection with mental health. At the same time, May's fashion line, which had long focused on inclusivity and diversity, began to expand rapidly. It wasn't just about clothing anymore, it was about representation. The line started to feature models of all ages, body types, and backgrounds. The message was clear: fashion should celebrate individuality, not conformity. The fashion industry was notoriously slow to change, but May's brand was quickly becoming a beacon for those who felt left out of the traditional beauty mold. Major retail companies and designers began reaching out to her, asking for collaboration and advice on how they could create more inclusive campaigns. "I think we've turned a corner," May said one evening after a meeting with a major retailer. "But it's not enough to be inclusive in our ads. It has to be in our stores, in our products, and in our messaging every single day." Yet, for every success, there were setbacks. In some parts of the world, particularly in more conservative regions, the #RespectOverlooks movement faced fierce resistance. Critics accused the movement of promoting mediocrity or diluting cultural norms. In countries where the beauty industry was an integral part of the economy, there was hesitation to challenge long-held traditions. Elon and May both knew that pushing for systemic change would take time, and that they would encounter setbacks along the way. They had learned to expect criticism, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Elon was often targeted by critics who labeled him a social engineer, pushing for cultural change that would disrupt the free market. May, on the other hand, faced accusations from some quarters that she was using her own success to impose her worldview on others. But both of them knew this fight wasn't about personal gain. It was about changing the narrative for future generations. And despite the criticism, their resolve remained unshaken. The next big challenge was the business world. The fashion, beauty, and entertainment industries were some of the most lucrative in the world, and changing them meant disrupting decades, if not centuries, of established business models. Elon knew that large corporations would resist the movement because it would force them to rethink their marketing strategies, their hiring practices, and their product offerings. But he also knew that this disruption could spark a more authentic and sustainable future for these industries. Tesla, SpaceX, and other companies within Elon's portfolio were now at the forefront of the conversation. He challenged his executives to think beyond profits, to think about the impact their brands could have on society. It was a shift in how business was done, one that integrated social responsibility into the core of their operations. And it wasn't just for show, he wanted measurable, systemic change. The most significant moment came when the first-ever global beauty and fashion conference was held in Paris, where Elon and May were the keynote speakers. Representatives from major beauty brands, top designers, and global media companies were in attendance. The conference focused on how industries could better reflect the values of equality and inclusivity, and how they could do so while remaining profitable. Elon took the stage first. If we are to build a future based on respect, we must begin with how we treat ourselves and others. We must challenge the old standards that have limited our potential and embrace diversity in every way. From our bodies to our minds, from our appearances to our thoughts, we must celebrate what makes us unique. May followed, her voice filled with emotion. True beauty isn't about perfection. It's about being real. It's about showing up in the world with all your flaws, your scars, your imperfections, and knowing that you're enough just as you are. The conference ended with a standing ovation, and soon after, multiple beauty brands signed new pledges to promote inclusivity in their campaigns. It was a significant moment, one that marked the beginning of a much larger change. But Elon and May knew that their work was far from finished. They were building a foundation that could stand the test of time, a foundation that would continue to change how the world viewed beauty for generations to come. Months had passed since the Global Beauty and Fashion Conference in Paris, and though the victories were countless, Elon and May knew that this movement was a long road, and the ultimate goal remained elusive. But as the world shifted, there was a sense that something monumental was about to happen. The #RespectOverlooks movement had gained not just followers but true believers, people who were committed to this new world, where beauty was no longer confined to an unattainable ideal. Elon and May stood together at the top of the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, reflecting on how far they'd come. From the movement's inception to this moment, it had been a relentless pursuit of change. They had faced countless obstacles, corporate resistance, cultural pushback, and the enormous challenge of changing the very nature of beauty itself. But now, as they gazed out over the bustling city beneath them, there was a quiet sense of satisfaction. The world was on the cusp of a transformation. The global declaration had ignited a spark that had grown into a wildfire, but there was one last step before the #RespectOverlooks movement would be fully realized, a landmark international treaty. This treaty would compel every nation that signed it to implement laws protecting individuals from appearance-based discrimination in every sector of life, from employment to education, from healthcare to housing. The treaty would be signed at a ceremony to take place in the United Nations headquarters in New York City. Representatives from every corner of the globe would come together for the event. It would be the culmination of years of hard work, grassroots campaigning, and tireless efforts by Elon, May, and countless others who had worked for years to ensure that beauty would never again be the standard by which a person's worth was measured. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, May was flooded with emotions. It was hard to believe that something as simple as rejecting narrow beauty standards had led them here, but she knew that this moment was not just about her and Elon. It was about the millions of people whose stories had been ignored for so long, the people whose lives had been changed by the movement. "Do you think they'll sign it?" May asked one evening as they prepared for the final round of talks with world leaders. Elon looked out the window of their New York apartment, his expression thoughtful. "They have to. The world is ready for it. We've created a tipping point where change is inevitable. The movement has been unstoppable." As the day of the signing ceremony arrived, the air in the UN building was electric. Reporters from every major news outlet were gathered, cameras flashing in every direction. Outside, crowds of activists and supporters had gathered, holding signs that read, "Beauty is diversity," and "Equality for all faces." They were chanting, singing, and celebrating the fight that had brought them to this historic moment. Elon and May entered the assembly hall, their faces filled with determination. The moment they had fought for was finally within reach. They took their seats at the front of the room, surrounded by diplomats and world leaders who had stood behind them for this cause. May could feel the weight of the moment on her shoulders, but she didn't flinch. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for. The first speaker was a young activist from South Africa, who had been part of the movement from the very beginning. "This isn't just about rejecting a stereotype," she said passionately. "It's about embracing every human being, regardless of how they look, regardless of how old they are, regardless of how different they seem. Beauty is diverse, beauty is complex, and beauty is in all of us." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, and soon, leaders from around the world began to speak. Each speech brought the room closer to the pivotal moment, the moment that would change history. The world was watching, waiting for the final sign of commitment. When the time came for the signing of the treaty, it was clear that the world was united. One by one, representatives from over 150 countries stood and signed their names to the document. With each signature, the movement gained more power. The world's commitment to inclusion, diversity, and respect was now not just an ideal, it was a binding international agreement. Finally, it was Elon and May's turn. They stood together, side by side, as they took their places at the podium. May felt a rush of emotion. She turned to Elon, her eyes glistening with tears. "We did it," she whispered. Elon nodded, his voice barely audible. "We're changing the world." The moment they signed the treaty was met with thunderous applause. The room erupted in celebration. Journalists shouted questions, leaders exchanged words of congratulations, and the atmosphere was filled with the overwhelming feeling of accomplishment. But for Elon and May, the celebration was just beginning. Their work was far from over. The treaty was a victory, but the real challenge would be ensuring its enforcement across the globe. They still had to work with governments, businesses, and educators to make the principles of the treaty a living reality. The weeks that followed saw an outpouring of support for the treaty. Countries that had once been hesitant to adopt new laws now moved swiftly to comply with the new global standard. The fashion and entertainment industries, once resistant to change, now embraced the diversity of beauty. Companies began to diversify their hiring practices, ensuring that people of all appearances had equal opportunities for success. Social media platforms began to shift their algorithms, giving space to a broader range of voices and stories. May's fashion line became a global sensation, with millions of people celebrating its message of inclusivity. Meanwhile, Elon's efforts to integrate respect for diversity into the corporate world were groundbreaking. His companies, Tesla, SpaceX, and others, continued to lead by example, showing that businesses could thrive while prioritizing people over profits. It wasn't just the industries that were changing. Everyday people were starting to see themselves differently. The #RespectOverlooks movement had sparked something deeper, an understanding that beauty isn't something to chase, it's something to be celebrated. People no longer felt the pressure to conform to an ideal that didn't represent them. They embraced who they were, flaws, scars, and all. May often received letters from people who thanked her for showing them that they were enough. She had become a role model for so many, not because of her age or her appearance, but because of the values she embodied: authenticity, courage, and a relentless commitment to equality. Elon, too, saw the effects of the movement in his own life. It wasn't just about technology or business anymore, it was about creating a future where everyone could live authentically, free from judgment and discrimination. As Elon and May watched the world transform, they knew their work wasn't finished. They had achieved something incredible, but there was always more to be done. As the movement grew and evolved, new challenges would emerge. But one thing was certain: the fight for true equality, for respect over looks, would continue until the world was finally a place where everyone could be seen and valued for who they truly were. And they were ready for whatever came next. The world had changed, but as Elon and May knew all too well, change was not something that happened overnight. It was a slow, deliberate process, a series of moments that added up to a new reality. The hashtag Respect Overlooks movement was no longer just a movement, it was a part of the fabric of society, woven into every corner of the world. Yet the work of building a future that fully embraced diversity, inclusivity, and self-respect was ongoing. As the movement spread, people everywhere were beginning to see themselves differently. They were no longer just seeing their reflections in mirrors or through social media filters. They were seeing themselves through a new lens, one that celebrated every imperfection, every mark of time, and every characteristic that made them unique. Elon and May sat in a quiet corner of the UN headquarters in New York, the place where their historic journey had started. The excitement of the treaty signing had begun to settle into a steady, hopeful rhythm. They were no longer standing in the midst of a battle for attention or media headlines. This was the calm after the storm, the phase of implementation. Elon leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "It's happening, May. We've moved the needle. But we still have to keep pushing." May nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You're right. There's a whole world out there still learning how to embrace this new reality. It's going to take a generation to fully heal, but the foundation is laid. The hardest part is over." Around the world, governments were slowly but surely enacting the new laws that would provide protections against appearance-based discrimination. A few had been slower to comply, but public pressure, spurred by grassroots activism and the support of influencers like Naomi, pushed them to catch up. Even in countries where the cultural tides were slower to shift, the UN treaty had given activists the legal framework they needed to challenge injustices and push for systemic change. May's initiative, which had started as a small project to help people of all ages, sizes, and backgrounds feel beautiful in their own skin, had now grown into a global movement. Her fashion line, once a niche project, was now a global brand known for its diversity and inclusivity. The simple concept, clothing for everyone, had taken on a much deeper meaning. Her team, which had initially been composed of a handful of like-minded individuals, had grown into a worldwide organization dedicated to creating positive change. They were working with other brands, helping them diversify their products and marketing strategies. May had turned her fashion brand into a platform for education, hosting workshops, panels, and open conversations about body image, self-esteem, and acceptance. Meanwhile, Elon's influence continued to reach far beyond the tech world. Tesla and SpaceX, two of his most prominent companies, were making waves in ways that went beyond electric cars and space exploration. He'd made it a point to ensure that the companies he built reflected the values of the hashtag Respect Overlooks movement. Tesla had rolled out initiatives aimed at ensuring that the technology they created was accessible to people from all walks of life. They introduced new accessibility features in their vehicles, ensuring that those with disabilities had the same opportunity to enjoy the benefits of electric cars. SpaceX, with its grand goal of making life multiplanetary, also took into account the need to ensure that space exploration, too, reflected the values of inclusion and equality. Space isn't just for the privileged. It's for humanity, Elon had famously said during a press conference, which sent waves through the media. "When we go to Mars, we'll take all of humanity with us, not just the people who look a certain way." But despite the successes, Elon and May both understood that their battle wasn't over. The world had begun to move in the right direction, but progress was fragile. There would always be voices that wanted to turn back the clock, voices that would try to pull society back into narrow, exclusionary definitions of beauty. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. The hashtag Respect Overlooks movement had ignited a global conversation, but to ensure lasting change, the message had to reach every corner of society. Elon, once a man focused solely on technology and innovation, now saw himself as part of something much bigger. He had always been driven by the desire to make the world a better place, but he now realized that his influence had to extend beyond just his businesses. Together with May, he began working on a new project, one that would focus on shaping the future of education. This project aimed to integrate the principles of respect, self-love, and inclusivity into school curriculums, ensuring that children were not only educated in math and science, but in empathy and acceptance as well. The goal was to ensure that future generations would grow up with an understanding of what it meant to value people for who they were, not how they looked. The project was ambitious. It involved lobbying governments, working with educators, and partnering with non-profit organizations. But Elon and May knew it was essential. They could build a world that celebrated diversity, but if future generations weren't raised with the same values, the cycle of discrimination and judgment would simply repeat itself. Think about it, Elon had said, looking over a proposal for the new educational initiative. If we teach kids to see beauty in every form, to respect others, and to love themselves for who they are, we're not just changing a generation, we're changing the future. May smiled, her heart swelling with pride. It's a legacy, Elon. One we can leave for the next generation. We're planting seeds, and they'll grow into something beautiful. The two of them continued to travel, speaking at conferences, appearing on panels, and meeting with world leaders. Their goal was clear, to create a lasting legacy of inclusivity, diversity, and respect for future generations. And slowly, their vision was taking root. There were moments when May would look back on the early days of the movement, when it felt like an uphill battle, when there were so many obstacles and so much resistance. She remembered the skepticism, the criticism, and the doubts. But she also remembered the strength of the people who had joined them in the fight for change. Naomi, who had been one of the first major influencers to champion the movement, was now an international spokesperson, working alongside May to spread the message further. Influencers from every corner of the globe joined the fight, their collective voices echoing the message that beauty was more than skin deep. Elon, too, had become a symbol of the power of technology to change the world for the better. His companies were no longer just about innovation, they were about inclusion, equity, and making a difference. His work had transcended the realms of space and electric cars, and now it had a deeper meaning. His legacy, too, was in the making. It wasn't just about the big wins anymore. It was about the everyday victories, the small moments when someone stood up for themselves, when a person walked into a room and felt good about who they were, when someone looked in the mirror and saw themselves as beautiful. Those moments, though often unnoticed, were the foundation of the movement's true success. The world was shifting, and Elon and May had been the catalysts of that change. They had started with a dream, a simple idea that beauty should not be defined by a single standard. But they had built something far more powerful, a legacy of acceptance, respect, and love that would last for generations. As the movement continued to evolve, Elon and May knew that there was still so much more to be done. The work was never truly finished. But as they looked at the world they had helped create, they couldn't help but feel hopeful. For the first time, it felt as though the world was on the right path. And in the end, that was the legacy they wanted to leave behind, a world where everyone, regardless of how they looked, was valued for who they truly were. The world was beginning to change in ways that were hard to imagine just a few years ago. The seeds of the #RespectOverlooks movement had been planted, and now, like a wave rippling across the surface of a still pond, its impact was being felt everywhere, from schools in rural villages to corporate boardrooms in the world's most bustling cities. Elon and May's journey had not only changed the way society viewed beauty but also redefined how individuals, organizations, and even nations saw the value of inclusivity. But as they had learned throughout their journey, the road to change was never straight. Even after the treaty, even after their triumphs, there were still challenges ahead. A movement as monumental as this required constant effort, new ideas, and the resolve to stay the course, even when the journey seemed long and the path uncertain. It was an early morning in May's New York office, and the phone calls were already flooding in. A large corporation had just released an ad campaign that appeared to use token diversity rather than genuine inclusivity. It had been picked up by social media almost immediately, sparking outrage. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, but May knew it was important. The standards had changed, and people now expected authenticity, anything less was a betrayal. "May, it's happening again," her assistant said, holding up her phone with a look of concern. "It's going viral. They're calling out the ad for being performative." May glanced at the screen. A string of comments filled her with both pride and apprehension. The movement had created a culture of accountability. When companies made mistakes, they were no longer simply allowed to get away with it. People were speaking out, loudly and clearly, that they would not settle for empty gestures. She leaned back in her chair. "It's a good thing," she said with determination. "This is what we've been fighting for. People are holding the world to a higher standard now." In another part of the world, in Tokyo, Japan, Elon was sitting in a sleek conference room with a group of business leaders. The room was filled with the kind of people who usually dominated discussions on innovation and tech, but today the conversation had shifted. The topic at hand wasn't new gadgets or high-tech developments, it was social responsibility and corporate culture. "Elon, we've seen how you've incorporated inclusivity and respect in your companies. It's been impressive. But how do we implement this kind of change at a global scale?" one of the executives asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Elon smiled, leaning forward slightly. "The first step is being genuine. It's easy to slap a diversity sticker on your product or make a few token gestures. But that's not enough anymore. People want to see real change, real action. If you truly believe in this shift, it has to be woven into your company's DNA. And it has to start from the top." The conversation turned into a deep discussion about the future of global businesses, and how they could integrate the principles of the #RespectOverlooks movement into their own practices. Elon's words resonated with many, but some still struggled with the idea that real change could come from within their multi-billion-dollar empires. It was easier to stick to the status quo, to continue marketing the same narrow definition of beauty that had been ingrained for decades. But Elon wasn't giving up. "Look, the market is changing," he said, with a tone of absolute certainty. "People want to invest in companies that reflect their values. They want to buy from brands that treat everyone with respect, no matter their shape, color, or age. The tide is turning. You can either ride the wave or be left behind." Back in New York, May was meeting with a group of school administrators, discussing how to integrate the lessons of the #RespectOverlooks movement into school curriculums. There had been a growing demand for education reform, with parents and teachers calling for a more inclusive approach to teaching children about diversity and self-worth. May, with her deep understanding of both the fashion industry and social movements, was in the perfect position to help guide the way. The conversation was intense, with educators passionately discussing the challenges they faced in creating a more inclusive environment for their students. Some felt that the curriculum was too narrow, too focused on outdated ideals of beauty and success. They knew that children needed to learn about the value of inner qualities, that self-worth could not, and should not, be defined by what others saw on the outside. "I'm concerned about the growing influence of social media and the unrealistic beauty standards it promotes," one teacher said. "Our kids are seeing filtered, edited versions of reality every day, and it's affecting their mental health." May nodded in agreement. "We need to counteract that by teaching them to value themselves beyond appearance. We need to help them see that beauty is about kindness, confidence, and integrity, qualities that can't be airbrushed or digitally altered." In the coming months, the efforts to bring the principles of the movement to schools around the world gained traction. New textbooks were created, and workshops for educators were rolled out in cities and towns everywhere. Students, teachers, and parents joined forces, ensuring that the next generation would grow up with a much healthier view of beauty, diversity, and self-worth. Across the globe, more and more businesses began to embrace the ethos of the movement. Brands that had once been synonymous with exclusivity and unattainable beauty were now taking steps to change their image. They introduced inclusive product lines, hired diverse models, and shifted their advertising to reflect the realities of the people they were trying to reach. And it wasn't just in fashion and media. Healthcare systems began re-evaluating how they treated patients. There were more diverse representations in medical research, ensuring that treatments worked for everyone, regardless of skin color, gender, or body type. The tech industry, too, began making strides to create products that were designed with accessibility in mind. Elon's influence extended beyond his own companies and into entire industries. It was no longer just about changing one company or one industry, it was about changing an entire ecosystem. As the ripples continued to spread across the globe, Elon and May watched in awe as the world began to reflect the change they had so deeply desired. People were no longer confined by rigid beauty standards or judged by how closely they resembled a narrow, unrealistic ideal. Instead, they were celebrated for their individuality, their uniqueness, and their authenticity. But they also knew that the fight was far from over. While there had been progress, there would always be forces working to maintain the status quo. New battles would emerge, and the fight for true equality and respect would continue. Still, as they looked at the growing movement, the lives it had touched, the changes it had inspired, they knew that they had built something lasting. Something that could never be undone. It wasn't just a fleeting trend. It was a movement that would change the world for generations to come. The final stretch of the journey was upon them. Elon and May, having poured their hearts and souls into the #RespectOverlooks movement, now found themselves at the crossroads of what had been and what could be. Their individual efforts had changed the way the world viewed beauty, diversity, and self-worth, but the true test of their impact would come in how this new world could be sustained. It was a sunny morning when Elon received a call that would further solidify their place in history. It was the United Nations once again. They had been invited to present their vision for a truly inclusive world at the Global Sustainability Summit. This was no ordinary invitation, it was a recognition of the powerful transformation their movement had catalyzed, and it was an opportunity to address world leaders in front of a global audience. Elon, the voice on the other end of the line said, "We'd like you and May to give a keynote at the summit. Your work has inspired millions, and we want you to share the blueprint for the next phase of this transformation." Elon's heart raced. He had never imagined that their work would grow to this scale. "We'll be honored," he replied. "It's time to make this movement global." As the summit approached, Elon and May knew that this was more than just a chance to showcase their progress, it was an opportunity to pave the way for a new era. The movement had already spread far and wide, but now they had to ensure that it would continue to grow, evolve, and endure. The night before the summit, May sat in her hotel room, reflecting on the journey. She thought about the first moments when she had stood up for herself, when she had dared to believe in a world where people weren't judged based on their looks. She thought about the countless individuals who had joined the cause, each person with their own story, their own struggle, and their own determination to make the world a better place. But even now, as she looked out over the twinkling lights of the city, she knew that the battle was far from over. The movement had made significant strides, but there were still those who resisted change, those who clung to outdated beliefs. The real challenge would always be not just raising awareness but ensuring lasting action. It would take generations to truly eliminate the deep-seated prejudices that had been embedded in society for centuries. The day of the summit arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. World leaders, influential CEOs, and activists from every corner of the globe gathered in the United Nations headquarters. The summit, broadcast live to millions, was a monumental event, and the anticipation was palpable. This was a historic moment, one that had the potential to shape the future. Elon and May stepped onto the stage, greeted by thunderous applause. They stood side by side, two figures who had fought for a cause bigger than themselves. As the lights dimmed and the audience settled, Elon began to speak. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "We stand here today, not as individuals, but as representatives of a movement that began with a simple idea, that beauty is not defined by appearance, but by the richness of our character, the kindness we show to others, and the authenticity with which we live our lives." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "We've come a long way in this fight, but the truth is, we are just getting started. The world is full of potential to change, to evolve, and to heal. And we, as a global society, have the power to reshape what it means to be truly beautiful, to be truly human." May took a step forward, her voice warm and compassionate. "We've built something incredible over the last few years, but it's more than just a movement. It's a new way of thinking, a new way of living. It's about showing up for one another, supporting each other, and most importantly, respecting one another, regardless of how we look, where we come from, or what we've been through. She glanced at Elon, who nodded in agreement. The movement we've created is about respect, respect for ourselves, respect for others, and respect for the world we all share. It's about moving away from a culture that tells us to conform to narrow standards and embracing a world that celebrates diversity in every form. The crowd listened intently as Elon and May shared their vision for the future, a world where inclusivity and respect were the cornerstones of every industry, every community, and every nation. They spoke about education reform, corporate responsibility, and the need for systemic change in healthcare, fashion, and the media. Their words were both powerful and optimistic, painting a picture of a future where the ideals of the #RespectOverlooks movement would be woven into the very fabric of society. We've already seen remarkable progress, Elon continued. But the real work begins now. It's not enough to sign a treaty or release a campaign. We need to make inclusivity a part of everything we do. We need to build a future where no one is judged by how they look but by the content of their character and the impact they have on the world. The room erupted into applause, and it was clear that their message had struck a chord. For the first time, the movement felt like it had transcended a single issue. It was no longer about changing how people viewed beauty, it was about changing how people viewed each other, how they viewed themselves, and how they viewed the world at large. After the speech, the summit was filled with lively discussions and debates. World leaders and industry experts gathered to strategize about the best ways to implement the changes that Elon and May had proposed. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, there was a shared sense of determination in the air. People were ready to move forward. Later that evening, as the summit concluded, Elon and May walked through the bustling streets of New York City, the glow of the city lights reflecting the quiet satisfaction in their hearts. They had started with a dream, a vision of a world where beauty and respect were no longer separate but intrinsically linked. And now, they were standing on the brink of something much bigger, a future that they had helped shape with their own hands. But the journey was far from over. There was still work to be done. Still a world to change. As they walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, May spoke first. "We've come a long way, Elon. But it's just the beginning." Elon nodded. "The road ahead is long, but we've built something that will last. We've laid the foundation for a better world." Together, they continued down the street, knowing that the best was yet to come. A future filled with hope, respect, and the unwavering belief that everyone, no matter how they looked, deserved to be treated with dignity and love. The day after the Global Sustainability Summit, Elon and May found themselves reflecting on the overwhelming response to their keynote speech. What started as a simple conversation had now blossomed into a global conversation, a movement that had transcended industries, cultures, and political boundaries. It was a turning point not only for them but for the world. They had sparked something that would continue to ripple out, changing the course of history. But despite the success and the praise, there was no time to rest. The real challenge lay in transforming the conversation into tangible, long-lasting change. Elon's mind was already whirling with ideas and strategies. He was planning new initiatives in his tech companies, from developing AI models that promoted inclusivity to introducing corporate policies that made diversity a fundamental pillar of their operations. May, on the other hand, was focused on the human side of things. She spent her days working with schools, educators, and activists to ensure that the values of the #RespectOverlooks movement were being incorporated into the next generation's education. They were no longer fighting for acceptance, they were fighting to make respect the baseline for society as a whole. One afternoon, a breakthrough came when Elon received a call from a major tech company. They were interested in partnering with him on a groundbreaking project, an AI-driven platform that would help schools and businesses track the inclusivity of their practices, ensuring that all individuals were treated with respect, regardless of their background. The platform would use advanced algorithms to highlight biases in hiring practices, marketing strategies, and even product development. Imagine the possibilities, Elon said, his voice brimming with excitement. If we can implement this technology across industries, we'll not only hold people accountable, but we'll also create a world where respect is the foundation of every decision. May, who had been listening to the conversation, nodded in agreement. This could be the next step. We've got to move from awareness to action. People need the tools to live out these values every day. The partnership with the tech company quickly turned into a global collaboration. Major corporations, universities, and government agencies began adopting the platform, and soon, a ripple effect began to take place. Bias was being identified and addressed in ways that had never been possible before. Hiring practices were more inclusive, marketing campaigns were representative of real diversity, and companies were held accountable for their actions, both online and offline. But perhaps the most important part of the project was the impact it had on individuals. People were finally seeing the power they had to change the world around them. Schools started incorporating the platform into their curriculums, teaching students the importance of respect and empathy for others, no matter their background or appearance. In workplaces, employees found that their voices were finally being heard, their contributions valued for what they brought to the table rather than how they looked or where they came from. The world was evolving, and it was all because of the relentless commitment to inclusivity that had been ignited by Elon and May's vision. The transformation was not just about changing the media's portrayal of beauty, but about creating a culture of respect and understanding, a world where people's differences were celebrated and where love, kindness, and empathy were the true measures of beauty. One of the most powerful moments came when a high school in rural America implemented a Respect Week, inspired by the #RespectOverlooks movement. The event became a national sensation. Students, parents, and teachers came together to celebrate the diversity within their community. They shared stories of how they had been judged or misunderstood because of their appearance, and how they had worked to overcome these challenges. At the end of the week, the students presented a pledge, a commitment to continue living the values they had learned, to make their school a place where everyone felt safe and valued. The pledge went viral, sparking similar events in schools around the world. May watched a video of the event, her heart swelling with pride. This was the change they had been fighting for. It wasn't just about changing the minds of CEOs or celebrities. It was about changing the way entire generations thought about beauty, respect, and acceptance. Elon and May were no longer just advocates, they were catalysts for a worldwide transformation. The #RespectOverlooks movement had evolved from a campaign into a global force, influencing everything from the products people bought to the ways they interacted with each other. But their work was far from done. As they stood together, looking at the progress they had made, they both knew that the true power of their movement lay not just in creating change but in maintaining it. They had to keep pushing, keep challenging the world to live up to the ideals they had set in motion. It was late one night when May received a letter. It was from a young woman in California, who had been following the movement since its inception. In her letter, she thanked May for giving her the courage to embrace who she truly was, without worrying about how others saw her. The young woman, once an insecure teenager plagued by body image issues, had now become a leader in her community, using her platform to advocate for self-love and acceptance. Tears welled up in May's eyes as she read the letter. It was moments like this, real, tangible proof of the difference they were making, that made the long road worth it. The impact they were having on individuals' lives was more profound than any headline or corporate partnership. They had sparked something inside people, a belief in themselves and in a future where beauty was defined by respect and authenticity, not by external appearance. As the movement grew, so did the network of people who were working to keep it alive. More organizations, schools, and governments joined the cause. Every day, Elon and May were approached by individuals and groups who wanted to be a part of the change. There were moments when they doubted themselves, when they felt the weight of the world's expectations pressing down on them. But those doubts were always outweighed by the progress they saw, by the lives that were being touched, one by one. They realized that the true victory wasn't just in achieving their goals, it was in knowing that they had created a world where everyone could look in the mirror and feel proud of who they were, no matter their appearance. They had laid the groundwork for a future where beauty was not just skin deep, but a reflection of the love, kindness, and respect that people showed to one another. As they stood at the helm of a movement that had changed the course of history, May turned to Elon. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion. Elon nodded. "We're just getting started." And with that, they both knew that no matter how far they had come, the journey was far from over. They had sparked a revolution, one that would continue to burn brightly, lighting the way for generations to come. The weeks following the summit had been a blur for Elon and May. Their lives were no longer just their own, they had become intertwined with the lives of millions of people across the world. The #RespectOverlooks movement had evolved into something more profound than they had ever imagined, and its ripple effects were still unfolding. But as with every great movement, there comes a time to pause, to reflect, and to assess the long-term impact. It had been years since they first decided to embark on this journey, and now, as they stood at the pinnacle of their success, they both understood that their true work had just begun. The phone rang late one night, breaking the silence of their quiet evening at home. It was a call from the White House. The United States was preparing to launch an international initiative on inclusivity, one that would build on the momentum of the #RespectOverlooks movement. The president wanted Elon and May to take a central role, helping to guide the policies and strategies that would shape the future of inclusivity and respect across the globe. As Elon listened to the details of the proposal, he could hear the excitement in the voice of the White House representative. "Your work has changed the way people think about beauty and respect. We want to take that energy and push it forward on a global scale. We're looking at an international summit to tackle discrimination, bias, and inequality in every facet of society. We need your leadership." Elon set the phone down, his mind spinning. He turned to May, who had been sitting across the room, silently observing his reactions. "It's happening. This is what we've worked for." May smiled, though there was a weight in her expression. "It's overwhelming, but I knew it would get here. The world is ready. We've made sure of that." The initiative was a massive undertaking. It involved world leaders, human rights activists, and corporate giants all coming together to pledge resources and effort into creating policies that would end discrimination in the workplace, schools, healthcare systems, and the media. It wasn't just about acknowledging diversity, it was about integrating inclusivity into every societal structure. For Elon and May, this was the culmination of their efforts. They worked tirelessly on developing educational frameworks, corporate guidelines, and media strategies that would ensure the ideals of respect, inclusivity, and self-worth were more than just buzzwords, they had to become actionable commitments. Their involvement with the international initiative opened doors to unprecedented collaborations. It wasn't just about global corporations or governments now, it was about grassroots efforts, local communities, and organizations that had been working tirelessly for years to push inclusivity forward in smaller, less noticeable ways. Together, they formed a coalition, a network of individuals and entities that were determined to make inclusivity the norm, not the exception. But despite all the praise and recognition, Elon and May never lost sight of what truly mattered, the lives they were touching. As they traveled the world, meeting with children in schools, workers in factories, and families in their homes, they saw firsthand the difference their work had made. One of the most touching moments came during a visit to a small rural community in Africa. The school there had started an initiative, inspired by the #RespectOverlooks movement, to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for children of all backgrounds, abilities, and appearances. The children, once isolated due to their differences, now sat together in classrooms filled with laughter, respect, and cooperation. May, standing before them, shared her story. "When I was younger, I didn't feel like I belonged. I felt like I was too different. But now, I see that our differences are our strength. You are all beautiful, not because of how you look, but because of who you are inside. Never forget that." The children, who had once struggled with feeling inferior, now smiled with pride as they looked up at May, their eyes shining with the belief that they too could change the world. In that moment, May knew, this was what it was all for. This was the legacy they were building. As the years passed, the movement's influence continued to grow. Major fashion brands adopted more inclusive models, featuring a range of body types, skin tones, and ages. Movies, television shows, and advertisements began to reflect the diversity of real life, and the concept of beauty was redefined to encompass not just appearance but kindness, integrity, and compassion. But the true transformation wasn't just external. It was in the hearts and minds of individuals. People no longer judged one another based on superficial factors. Instead, they focused on each other's character, contributions, and potential. The world was no longer divided by arbitrary standards of beauty, but united by respect and love. One evening, as Elon and May sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, they reflected on the journey they had taken together. It had been filled with challenges, heartache, and moments of doubt. But it had also been filled with incredible victories, small and large, and the knowledge that they had helped shape a world that was kinder, more compassionate, and more inclusive. Elon, May said quietly, do you ever think about where it all started? How far we've come? Elon nodded, his gaze focused on the horizon. I think about it all the time. From that first moment, when you were turned away from that store, to now, it's been an incredible journey. May smiled, the weight of their work settling in her heart. We didn't do it alone, you know. So many people joined us. So many voices that were once silent are now being heard. Together, we've built something that will last for generations. The movement they had sparked was now self-sustaining, carried forward by people who had once felt invisible or unheard. The mission was clear, to ensure that the next generation would never have to fight the battles they had fought, to ensure that respect, inclusion, and kindness were not ideals but everyday practices. Elon looked at May, his eyes filled with pride. We changed the world, didn't we? May's voice was soft but filled with a powerful conviction. We didn't just change the world. We changed how the world sees each other. And with that, they knew their work was complete. The #RespectOverlooks movement would live on, a lasting testament to the belief that true beauty lies in respect, and respect lies in the heart of every human being. As the world moved forward, the legacy of Elon Musk and May Musk, two individuals who refused to accept the status quo, would continue to inspire countless others to fight for a world where everyone, no matter their appearance, could be seen, heard, and valued for who they truly were. The end? Or, perhaps, the beginning of a world where respect is the only standard by which we judge one another. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?